Chapter 1683. Mag stopped in his tracks, and shockingly said, "System, you're not talking about slicing the Great Old One up for research, are you? The knowledge left behind by our ancestors tells us that any organic creature has the potential to be food. Dissecting the complicated fog on the surface of things, the essence is the same. Whether the Great Old Ones can be eaten or not is not a problem. The question is whether steaming or braising would be more delicious," the system replied calmly. Meg opened his mouth, but couldn't find the words to refute. "So, the host only needs to obtain a 500g serving of meat and hand it over as the system's research object," the system continued. "Wait." Meg frowned and suddenly realized that something was wrong. He rolled his eyes and said, "That's the Great Old Ones, an immortal existence that was sealed countless years ago, an existence with terrifying abilities. Now you want me to cut up a piece of his meat for you to research? Isn't this mission out of my scope? I'm just a chef. What's wrong with complaining on Weibo that other people's dishes are not good? They didn't curse me to catch the Great Old Ones for research, right?" "Ah." The system was silent for a while, then said, "After the appearance of the Great Old Ones, the food chain of this world has indeed exceeded the upper limit of the punishment set at the beginning, which is the so-called out of scope. Then I refuse this mission," Meg said without hesitation. "If the Great Old Ones were so easy to kill, the people back then wouldn't have had to spend so much effort to seal them here. Wouldn't it be delicious if each person took half a kilogram of meat home and braised it?" Judging from the system's words, the person who threw him into this world probably didn't study this world seriously. This was beyond the scope of the system's assistance. He didn't believe that a gourmet system without integrity could deal with the great apocalypse dominator. Not everyone could blossom with two flowers. Mission success. The host will receive a comprehensive inspection report of a new species, including racial analysis, various tolerance studies, weakness analysis. The system's tempting voice sounded again. "Inspection report?" Meg frowned and fell into a dilemma. He had to admit that the mission reward was indeed very tempting. Most of the fear towards the Great Old Ones stemmed from the fear of the unknown. Otherwise, what was so scary about a tentacle monster? There were plenty of perverts with such fetishes. If the system could provide a comprehensive test report and tear off the mysterious cloak of the Great Old Ones, it might really be able to find a way to deal with the Great Old Ones. He didn't want to pin his hopes on those gods whose existence he didn't know. The feeling of having one's fate in one's own hands was the most wonderful feeling. What if the mission fails? Mission failure. I believe that the host will not need to receive any punishment at that time. Convex Meg chose to accept the mission. Of course, whether he accepted it or not, the mission was there, and the countdown had started. With the system stirring things up, the terrifying atmosphere created by the bonfire party was completely gone. Once he thought about the crazy beliefs of these fellows and the possibility of them becoming the system's next breeding target, Meg suddenly felt that the so-called terror had become tasteless. However, since he had already contracted this party, Meg naturally had to go and take a look. He crossed the woods, knocked out a demon who seemed to be on the lookout, and stood on the branch of a big tree about 100 meters away from the bonfire. Not far away, a huge bonfire was burning on the flat ground. Hundreds of demons, humans, and orcs were naked, dancing a twisted and strange dance around the bonfire. The flickering light of the fire illuminated their crazed, grinning faces, and reflected a strange light in their eyes. In front of the bonfire, a 2-meter-tall, bamboo-like thin man with disheveled hair was waving a black scepter. The demon-like whisper came from his mouth. They seemed to be carrying out some kind of sacrificial ceremony, and the bamboo-like man should be the priest. Only he was still wearing a tattered black robe. Around the bonfire, animal corpses were scattered on the ground, and their heads were uniformly facing the direction of the bonfire. Meg frowned as he looked at this strange and promiscuous scene. If it was someone who did not have a strong mind power, they would have fainted on the spot. However, his gaze was quickly attracted to the 3 children who were tied up in front of the bamboo-like priest. They were 3 children who were less than 10 years old, 2 girls and 1 boy. They were tied together with a rope back to back, screaming in horror. It was even more terrifying in the midst of the chanting and whispers. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the priest walked in front of the 3 children. He raised the scepter in his hand high above his head, as if he was ready to smash it down directly. Everyone present grinned hideously as they surrounded the 3 children. Their eyes flashed with red light, as if they were looking at the food that was already on the table. "Use our blood as a sacrifice to help the gods escape," the priest shouted loudly. "Kill." Those guys pulled out daggers and sharp branches out of nowhere and stabbed at their hearts. The priest also smashed the scepter in his hand toward the 3 children with a crazy face. "These bastards." Meg's expression changed slightly, and he threw the long sword in his hand, which turned into a long rainbow and went straight toward the priest. "Why are they all dead?" About 3 minutes later, Irina appeared and looked at the tragic scene, a little puzzled. "In order to stop them from committing suicide, I killed them." Meg shrugged, then pointed at the 3 unconscious children lying on the grass, looked at Irina, and said, "Can you erase their memories?" "Okay." Irina walked toward the 3 children, and silently chanted a spell. With a wave of her hand, 3 golden streams of light went into the middle of their eyebrows. After a while, Crassus and Julian also returned. "Those who have been bewitched by the devil are really disgusting." Crassus raised his hand and burned the corpses to ashes. "They should be performing some kind of sacrificial ritual. I heard them say that they wanted to help the gods escape." Meg frowned. "Yes, and this operation should have been going on for a few days. The demonic aura in the core area is getting thicker. That guy might be preparing to escape." Julian also looked serious. "Let's go and see." Irina waved her hand and set up a barrier around the 3 children, and walked toward the sealed place first. "There is nothing that a fireball can't solve. If there is, then let's use 10 more." Crassus smiled confidently. "Frost may not be able to stop the demonic aura from leaking, but it can freeze all living things." Julian also said calmly. Meg was surprised by the confidence of the 2 big bosses, and also followed. After hesitating for a while, he whispered, "Then, can I cut some of that guy's meat later?" Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1684. The 3 people in front stopped and turned to look at Meg at the same time. "Alex, you're really something. While we're still thinking about how to solve the problem, you're already thinking about how to distribute the spoils." Crassus looked at Meg with some emotion. "I was this crazy when I was young." "No, you weren't." Julian shook his head. "When you were young, you could only be beaten up. That was because I gave in to them." Crassus's aura suddenly weakened a little. When he first created the close combat spell, he did suffer a lot because he was young. Almost all the mags of the same age beat him up. The worst thing was that he was beaten up by the mags who were younger than him. The past. "Let's not talk about it." Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. He was not trying to show off, he just wanted to complete the mission. However, since he had already said it, he could only pretend to be calm. "Fry or roast?" Irina asked with a serious face. "What does a demon taste like?" "I haven't tasted it yet." "This. We have to see the real thing to decide." Meg thought for a while and said. Crassus and Julian looked at the 2 of them. One dared to ask, and the other dared to answer. The filthy people who believed in demons had been dealt with. The thunderstorm mountains regained its peace. Only the cold wind howled in the mountains and the occasional thunder could be heard. In the middle of a snow-covered plain deep in the mountains, there was a pitch-black hole. Crassus raised his hand and threw a fireball in the direction of the hole. The pitch-black hole with a diameter of 2 meters seemed to be able to swallow the light. When the fireball entered, the light disappeared instantly as if it had never appeared. Above the hole, there was a strange black fog that seemed to be hiding some kind of ghost that was wriggling and twisting crazily. "The place of the seal is there." Julian stopped 5 meters away and looked at the black fog with a serious expression. "This black fog is very difficult to deal with. Everything below the cave entrance is shrouded in black fog. I can't see anything, and my spiritual power is also very limited. I can't investigate the situation below. Although its aura is a little different, this black fog is not much different from the black fog we encountered before. Leave it to me." Irina stepped forward with a relaxed expression, and raised the magic caster's staff in her hand. The black fog seemed to have sensed a threat, and after squirming for a while, it surged toward Irina. "Holy light, please heed my call and purify this evil." Irina chanted loudly, and a dazzling holy light burst forth from her magic caster's staff. The evil black fog was illuminated by the holy light and instantly melted like ice and fire. Accompanied by a sickening shriek, the black fog that filled the air above the hole was quickly eliminated. The holy light is indeed unique in its ability to eliminate evil. Julian nodded thoughtfully. Ice-type magic could barely cover up the hole, but it could do nothing to purify the black fog. The goddess of light was born to stand on the opposite side of evil. It's not a big deal to be able to purify evil. However, Irina should be the only great light-type magic caster in this world, right? Crassus' tone was filled with regret and worry. "Next, it's below." Irina's gaze fell on the hole. She raised her magic caster's staff high, and a larger ray of holy light than before pierced into the hole. A terrifying shriek like that of a ghost came from the hole, and the originally pitch-black hole became brighter under the illumination of the holy light. Everyone stuck their heads out to look down. The holy light had yet to disperse. The hole below was not a straight passage, but more like a huge cave. The hole was an opening above this cave. "This cave looks very deep," Crassus said with a frown. "We can all see it." Julian rolled his eyes. "Are we going to jump down like this?" Irina was already eager to try. The unknown was not scary to her. Instead, she found it challenging and interesting. "I'll lead the charge." Crassus was the first to jump down. 3 fireballs floated in front of him, illuminating the path below. "Let's go." Julian followed suit and jumped down. Soon, a flight of ice stairs appeared under his feet. Every time he took a step down, a flight of stairs would appear. It was as if he was taking a stroll in the air. He looked like an expert. "How are we going to go down?" Meg looked at Irina and asked. Although he could guarantee that he would not fall to his death, it was still not in line with the style of the world's best knight. "You jump, I'll jump." Irina looked at Meg affectionately. "Then let's go." Meg grabbed Irina's hand and jumped down into the hole. The cave was pitch black. Only Crassus led the way with 3 fireballs, illuminating and warming the area. Meg looked around. No one would have thought that there would be such a huge cave under the thunderstorm mountains. This is not a natural cave. It should have been dug out. However, it was done a long time ago, even longer than the history of the elves. Irina casually tossed out a few flares as she looked at the stone wall in the distance that had been leveled and chiseled out. "It seems like these guys are really left behind from ancient times. They are still alive after so many years," Julian said with a hoarse voice. "The good news is that they might have lost most of their power due to time and the seal." Crassus smiled casually. "The bad news is that we might not even be able to defeat them in such a state." Irina shrugged. "That's really bad." Crassus was speechless. He could not deny the existence of such a possibility. "We're going to reach the bottom," Crassus reminded. 2 fireballs suddenly appeared under his feet, and his rapidly falling body began to slow down. Julian was still walking down at a steady pace. Irina suddenly grabbed Meg's waist and leaned back. She changed her original head-down landing position to her feet facing down. Layers of golden silk threads appeared under her feet. Every time the net broke, her speed would decrease. When she landed on the ground, it was as if she had taken a light step. She stepped on the ground steadily and lightly. "My lady, you have great qigong." Meg praised in his heart. He naturally held the long sword at his waist. The cave was more than 1,000 meters deep. It was colder than the surface. The surroundings were very empty. Crassus' fireballs and Irina's magic caster's staff could not light up the cave much. "The demonic aura is coming from this direction." Irina turned around and pointed in a direction. "Let's go. Let's meet this ancient remnant." Crassus held his magic caster's staff and walked in front. The 3 fireballs split into 6 and surrounded everyone. There was still 1 fireball in front. No pop-up window. Chapter 1685. There were also countless complicated passageways in the massive cave. The black mist within the cave had been dispersed, but there was still dense black mist gathered in the passageways. Thus, Irina could only release a holy light barrier to envelop everyone while she continued to venture deeper into the cave using her perception of the source of the black mist. Everyone was very fast. After about 15 minutes, Irina stopped. The holy light barrier shattered, and the black fog in the passage dispersed, revealing the huge stone door at the end of the passage. The black stone door was about 100 meters tall, and there seemed to be a huge mural carved on it. Crassus let 3 fireballs fly near the stone door, and everyone could finally see the image carved on the door clearly. Everyone was shocked. Terrifying scenes were depicted on the huge murals. Dragons were tearing and killing each other, forest trolls were twisting off the heads of their companions while holding half of an elf in their mouths, scarlet-eyed goblins were riding on orcs as they chased after a group of monkeys, the endless sea was dyed red with blood, and countless corpses of demons floated on the surface of the sea as they were torn apart and eaten by a school of terrifying fish. In the center of the mural, there was an indescribable object as huge as a hill. The giant dragons were as small as mosquitoes in front of it, and countless tentacles were reaching out from the hexagonal seal on top of its head. Those tentacles were filled with crimson eyes that were shining with a demonic light, as if they were about to break out of the seal. What kind of monster is this? Crassus was also shocked, and exclaimed, "There's actually such a disgusting existence in this world. Evil must be used to describe it." Irina also shifted her gaze away in disgust. This scene seems familiar. The scene we saw when we entered the cannibal island was similar to this. Julian narrowed his eyes, and raised his hoarse voice. This should be the Great Old One, or the Devil. It's similar to the stone statue that the hairless monk found in the Urba tribe. Meg also looked at the huge mural with a solemn expression. The scene in the mural was very similar to what Rex had described back then. If the stone statue could be said to be the imagination of those believers, then this huge mural that had been passed down from ancient times must be a warning left behind by the person who sealed it back then. What lies in eternal slumber may not be death. Meg saw a classic sentence in the corner of the mural. He had seen this sentence in many books recently. Perhaps it was some kind of coincidence, or some kind of necessity. In that case, he's locked in here now, right? Crassus gripped his magic caster's staff tightly, and his expression became solemn. "Come on, let's go meet this big guy," Irina said eagerly. "Aren't you afraid?" "If I remember correctly, you're most afraid of these long tentacles?" Urian asked as he turned to Irina. "Are you sure?" Irina's question the world. "That won't happen. We still have something precious to protect, Mags." The towering door seemed to be specially designed for giants. Julian faced the door and closed his eyes. Wisps of frost quickly covered the door. About a minute later, Julian opened his eyes. He raised his hand, and a few ice balls flew out, hitting different spots on the stone door. Accompanied by a dull creaking sound, the huge door began to move backward slowly. "Be careful," Irina reminded. She raised her hand and cast a blessing of holy light on each of them. As the door opened, a thick black fog began to surge out from the crack of the door. It was accompanied by a dull murmur, like a demon from the abyss. The black fog crashed into the blessing of holy light and dispersed. Meg held his sword with both hands and slowly walked into the world behind the door. The dazzling holy light destroyed the black fog and pierced through the darkness. Behind the huge door was a spacious cave that was hundreds of meters tall. On an altar engraved with countless ancient runes, countless black chains were intertwined to bind a huge object that was as big as a small mountain. The 4 of them raised their heads to look at this scene, and their eyes were filled with shock. It was an extremely huge octopus. Countless tentacles stretched out from its body. Those tentacles were full of eyes, and each eye was suffused with a demonic red light. A hexagram seal was suppressing its head. It flickered with a faint golden light as if it would be destroyed at any time. Keek, that octopus monster seemed to have heard the sound of the door opening, and it let out a strange roar. Meg felt as if he was suddenly being stared at by countless pairs of eyes. Those eyes seemed to be all looking at them. One tentacle after another suddenly extended and surged toward the door. This was definitely a nightmare for people with trypophobia. Meg raised his sword and prepared to fight. Crassus and Julian also held their magic caster's staff and magic wand respectively. However, just as those tentacles were about to reach Meg and the others, a faint golden wall suddenly rose around the altar. The tentacles hit the golden wall as if they had hit a wall of fire. There was a sizzling sound of corrosion, and those tentacles actually started to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye. That huge object let out a sharp cry, and the countless tentacles suddenly retracted. The design of this seal is quite reasonable. Irina smiled as she put away her magic caster's staff. She walked around the altar, and wondered, could this be that fellow's head? It should be. Just a head is so huge. One can only imagine how huge its body is. Meg also put away his long sword, and sized up this octopus monster with a frown. The tentacles were wrapped in brownish-green mucus, and the squirming tentacles were nauseating. Should we burn it with fire? Or freeze it? Crassus asked as he stroked his chin. Urian walked around the entire altar with a grave expression as he said, normal magic is completely ineffective against the black mist, so there's no way that it'll have much of an effect on him. He's not in a very active state, which means that this sealing spell formation is still effective. The safest way is to seal him again on top of this spell formation. This fellow's body contains extremely terrifying magic power. Once it is released, we will definitely not be a match for it. Crassus frowned as he stared at the octopus monster for a while. He nodded, and said, "All right, I'll listen to you this time. What do you think?" Irina turned to look at Meg. Meg agreed with Julian's words very much. This was just a head of the great old one that had been cut off and sealed for countless years, but standing in front of it still made him feel insignificant as if he was facing an eternity. He had to admit that even if the four of them joined forces, they still had no confidence in fighting this fellow after breaking free from the seal. However, he had a mission. Sealing it again was just a delaying tactic. If they could not find a way to deal with these great old ones, they would still break free one day and harm the world. "I want to try slashing it," Meg said seriously. Chapter 1686. The three of them stared at Meg and fell into deep thought. Meg looked at them and also fell into deep thought. He really didn't want to show off. He had no other choice. "I'll just slash it once," Meg said tentatively. "All right, if you're a man, I'll slash it with you," Crassus said as he patted his chest. "I can slow down its movements." Julian nodded slightly. "I can use the holy light to open a path for you within the seal. However, the density of the black fog inside is unpredictable, so the time it will take may be very short. You have to return immediately after slashing it," Irina said with a smile. "All right." Meg nodded. He held his sword with both hands and stood in front of the altar. He exhaled softly, and his expression became extremely solemn. "It's coming," Irina shouted softly. A bright holy light shot out from her magic caster's staff and instantly illuminated the cave. It forcibly opened a path in the thick black fog and rushed straight toward the octopus monster's glabella. It left a black scorch mark several meters deep between its eyebrows, but it was still unable to cause any substantial damage to it. Almost at the same time, Julian slammed his magic caster's staff on the ground. The temperature in the cave suddenly dropped by tens of degrees. Frost began to spread rapidly from his feet to the octopus monster. Soon, a layer of white frost condensed on the octopus monster's tentacles. The speed of its wriggling decreased visibly, and its movements were obviously slowed and restricted. "Hey! Have a taste of my big fireball," Julian shouted as he leaped up tens of meters high. He waved his magic caster's staff at the octopus monster, and huge red fireballs flew toward it like meteorites. Keek! The octopus monster seemed to be angered by their actions. It let out a low growl and swung its tentacles to disperse most of the fireballs. However, a few fireballs still landed on its tentacles and exploded, leaving charred marks on its body. However, the injuries were quickly healed. Now, the moment Irina's holy light was activated, Meg had already chased after the light and rushed into the seal. He raised his long sword and slashed down on the nearest tentacle. The Tiandu sword was not a very sharp sword, but it was a very hard sword. Combined with his sword skills and strength, it was almost invincible. However, when the sword landed on the tentacle, it felt as though it had slashed into a swamp. The sticky and soft sensation removed most of the force from the long sword, while the countless suction cups on the tentacle followed the momentum and firmly held onto the Tiandu sword, making it difficult for him to pull the longsword back. Pairs of scarlet eyes were fixed on Meg, like wild beasts staring at their prey. More tentacles were coming in his direction, which meant that the octopus monster had noticed the intruder. His attack had failed, and his sword was stuck to the tentacle. There was probably nothing worse than this. At that moment, Meg only had one choice, which was to abandon the sword and leave. Irina and the others should be able to leave a path for him to return. Meg glanced at the Tiandu sword in his hand. The hilt of the sword flickered with a faint light, as though it wanted to say something. In that split second, Meg suddenly drew Fat Head Carp from his waist and stood on the tentacle. Clack! With a crisp sound, the tentacle that was as thick as a human's waist broke. It's done. Meg's eyes lit up. He did not have the time to be stunned. He put Fat Head Carp back into the scabbard at his waist and carried the Tiandu sword with the tentacle on his shoulder. Then, he turned and ran. The path left behind by the holy light was constantly shrinking. The black fog on both sides was crazily squirming and squeezing in. Behind him, countless tentacles were rushing toward him. Bang! Meg almost crashed out of the seal. He reached out and pressed his hand on the stone wall, leaving a half-foot deep palm print. Behind him, countless tentacles crashed into the golden light wall. The light wall flickered, and the tentacles that collided with it melted away. The octopus monster also let out an angry roar, as expected of Alex. Such courage and boldness. There is no other person in the younger generation who can match you. Crassus looked at Meg with admiration. Only when you are infinitely close to death can you understand the true meaning of survival. Meg wiped off his cold sweat and tried to be as calm as possible. I didn't expect that this devil's tentacle could really be cut off. Julian looked at the tentacle that was still stuck on Meg's sword with surprise. After leaving the seal, the tentacle had shrunk by more than half. However, it was still as thick as an adult's thigh. It was only 1 meter long, and there were 8 eyes on it. After being cut off, the red light had disappeared. However, it still looked very strange and terrifying. This monster should have a very strong self-healing ability. The severed tentacle can be completely restored in 3 breaths. Therefore, it doesn't matter to it if a few tentacles are cut off. Irina looked at the octopus monster that had recovered all of its tentacles, including the injuries that Crassus had inflicted on it. The damage caused by the holy light magic is indeed more severe than ordinary magic. It's not so easy to restore. Julian looked at the wound between the octopus monster's eyebrows and said thoughtfully, "In that seal, I can clearly feel the strength of this guy. Its body contains unimaginable energy, and it also has incomparably strong mental strength," Meg said as the only person who had entered the seal. "It seems that we can only strengthen the seal so that it can't escape for the time being and attract its followers here. Then, we can slowly think of a way." Julian frowned and began to walk around the altar to study the ancient runes. "If you need materials, I have some here. See if you can use them." Crassus threw a storage ring to Julian. "I also have a batch of formation materials here." Irina waved her staff, and a pile of materials that shone with various colors appeared in front of her. Meg quietly pulled the Tiandu sword out of the tentacle when no one was paying attention. Then, he used Fat Head Fish to cut off a section of the octopus tentacle with eyes, and said in his heart, "System, hurry up and accept this fresh tentacle of the Great Old One." Ding! An unknown powerful creature ingredient has been detected. Checked and accepted. Congratulations to the host for completing the high-level mission. You have obtained a Great Old One ingredient. The test report will be sent to the host in 24 hours. Please check and accept it. The octopus tentacle in Meg's hand disappeared, and the system's voice sounded in his mind at the same time. Although they didn't know what the system could detect, This was probably the only thing they could look forward to at the moment. Perhaps they could find a way to restrain this octopus monster from the test report. The terrifying thing about the Great Old One was not how strong their physical body was, but their ability to influence and control the mental strength of creatures everywhere. Even if they were sealed thousands of meters underground and shrouded in layers of formations, they could still influence this world. Chapter 1687. The restoration of the spell formation was not as smooth as they had imagined. Julian was already considered an experienced spell formation master, but this spell formation was really too old. Many things needed a long period of research before they could be sure. Otherwise, once they misunderstood and added rashly, it might cause the entire spell formation to collapse. I need some time, and I need to find a few spell formation masters to restore it together, Julian said to the three of them in a low voice. When it comes to spell formations, Novan is naturally the best in Chaos City. I can invite him over, Crassus said. Ashley is one of the best spell formation masters in the Elven race. She should have studied many ancient spell formations in the Elven race. I can get her to assist you, Irina said. The first person that came to Mag's mind was Barbara. Although this maiden was a little unreliable, and wasn't considered a spell formation master at her young age, she had said more than once that she had repaired an ancient teleportation portal to teleport herself from the Moon Nation to the Norland continent. There were almost no records of the Moon Nation on the Norland continent, but the languages of the two worlds were similar. This was as suspicious as the gap in the records of the Great Old Ones. Perhaps the time when the Moon Nation lost contact with the Norland continent was close to the time when the Great Old Ones existed. In that case, the teleportation portal that Barbara had restored might be from the same time period as the spell formation on this altar. Perhaps she could understand this sealing spell formation a little. Since that's the case, let's leave first. I will use the Holy Light spell to set up an isolation spell formation here. It can last for about 7 days to ensure that the demonic aura will not leak out. Irina chose 6 silvery white stones from the materials that she had just taken out, and placed them around the altar. After that, she used her magic caster's staff to draw some complicated lines and runes between them. Irina activated the spell formation, and rays of faint golden light were emitted from the 6 stones, forming 6 light screens that surrounded the entire altar. The octopus monster in the seal did not move anymore. It only let out an obscure low growl that was like the devil's whisper echoing in the cave. It also sounded like some kind of weird mockery. Hold your breath and focus. Don't be fooled by his voice. Let's leave this place immediately. Urian's expression suddenly turned serious as he slapped a frost spell on Crassus's face. Crassus was in a daze. Crassus woke up from his stupor and his expression changed slightly. He quickly followed Julian and retreated out of the cave. He said with lingering fear, "This monster's bewitchment is really scary. I don't even know when I fell into its trap." Meg held the long sword in one hand and bit the tip of his tongue to keep himself awake. His other hand grabbed Irina's hand and rushed out of the cave. About 5 minutes later, a group of people jumped out of the hole. Everyone exhaled in unison. Firstly, the air underground was indeed a little dirty. Secondly, he felt like he had escaped death. Meg wasn't that bad. He didn't have a strong attachment to the strong. However, Julian and Crassus were a little different. After all, they were legends who had reached the peak for many years. They couldn't help but feel a little indescribable when they suddenly discovered that there were beings who were far more powerful than them in this world. I think we have to keep this a secret for the time being. If someone with ulterior motives destroys the seal and releases this fellow, I'm afraid it won't be easy for us to lock it up again, Mag said to everyone. Greed can never be satisfied. We can't guarantee that other people can resist its temptation. We can't even guarantee that we can resist its temptation. The fewer people who know about this place, the better. Julian nodded. I agree. Apart from the array masters who repair the array, we shouldn't let anyone know about this for now. Irina nodded. I have no objection. If you don't want me to say it, then I won't say it. Crassus nodded indifferently. Then what do we do with this tentacle? Meg raised the tentacle that was still stuck on his long sword and asked. The thick tentacle was covered in a layer of sticky dark green mucus. The dead fish eyes looked weird and disgusting. Why don't we roast it for supper? I'm a little hungry, Crassus suggested. Dig out the eyes and roast them separately. That way, we won't have to waste the pig's eyes. Irina was deep in thought. Julian glanced at the tentacle and raised his eyebrows slightly. You guys go ahead. I won't eat it. I think we should keep it and use it as proof of the Great Old One's existence in the future. Meg shook his head and said. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to eat it, but whether this octopus tentacle could be eaten still depended on the system's test results. No one could guarantee what would happen to an old octopus that had lived for countless years. He didn't plan to test the poison himself. All right. Julian nodded. With a wave of his hand, a layer of ice appeared outside the octopus tentacle, sealing it in ice. Meg whistled. RZ, who had been circling in the sky for a long time, turned into a purple lightning bolt and landed lightly in front of everyone. What do we do with those fellows who were knocked out? Irina asked. Seal this hole temporarily, and let the Grey Temple clean it up. They are more professional at this job. Meg carried the 3 unconscious children over and placed them gently on RZ's back. That's a good idea. There are too many people, and it's too troublesome to move them back. Irina's eyes lit up, and she jumped onto the griffin's back with a smile. Julian waved his hand and sealed the hole again. At the same time, he used frost and snow to clean it up. Normal people wouldn't be able to tell what was so special about this place. The griffin flapped its wings and disappeared from the thunderstorm mountains very quickly. After returning to Chaos City, Meg handed the 3 children over to the City Lord's castle. The City Lord's castle might be able to help them find their families, or at least let them continue living in the orphanage. Crassus and Julian went to invite Novan, while Meg and Irina told Michael about the thunderstorm mountains and asked the Grey Temple to clean up the place. Michael stopped listening to Meg's description and looked at the octopus tentacle in shock. However, as the lord of a city, he calmed down very quickly. He looked at Meg and said, All right, I will go and look for Roland personally, and gather all the formation masters in Chaos City immediately for Julian and the rest to do their bidding. All right. Mag nodded slightly. Michael was a trustworthy partner, and at the same time, a person in power who could provide them with more help. Since that's the case, we will take our leave first. Meg bade farewell to Michael with Irina. After leaving the City Lord's castle, Irina directly teleported back to the first floor of the restaurant with Meg. Meg took off his mask and went into the kitchen to wash his hands. After that, he took 2 wine glasses and poured 2 glasses of wine. What happened tonight was a little too exciting. It was like dancing blades, and he had to drink some wine to calm himself down. Irina took the wine glass and smilingly asked Meg, Why did you have to cut it just now? Meg took a sip of the wine and calmly said, I just couldn't stand it. Chapter 1688. Roland personally led 300 Grey Temple elites to the Thunderstorm Mountains on 3 eagles. After seeing the tragic scene, even the experienced investigators vomited on the spot. Burn all the corpses and bury them. Bring the living ones back and lock them up in the secret prison. Leave the interrogation to the intelligence department. Report to me directly. The rest have no right to know, Roland said with a sullen face as he retracted his gaze from the evil altar. Yes. Everyone agreed in unison. They immediately showed their professionalism. A big pit was quickly dug, and all the corpses were thrown into the pit. The fire magic casters threw a few fireballs, and the corpses immediately turned into ashes. They were then buried by the sand, and the ground returned to normal very quickly. Let's go back. Roland led the team and left after making sure there were no omissions. Nobody asked anything during the whole process. Recently, the Grey Temple had taken over some strange cases and captured a bunch of strange people. However, they usually didn't have to do anything after they were dispatched. They only had to clean up the mess like a team of professional cleaners. However, these cases were kept confidential at the highest level in the Grey Temple. Even the members of the Grey Temple were forbidden from discussing it. If any news were to leak out, it wouldn't be as simple as disciplinary punishment. My lord, these are the confessions of those fellows we caught during the day. Bolton walked into Roland's office, closed the door, and placed a stack of confessions sealed in craft paper on the table. He looked at Roland hesitantly, and said, "What they said, a part of it is true." Roland picked up the craft paper bag and opened it. He flipped through the confessions. Bolton's expression changed slightly. Roland didn't say much, but there was a lot of information in it. Those fellows who were caught during the day were all crazy. They believed in a certain evil god, and prayed that one day the evil god would reappear in the world and turn the Norland continent into a land of calamity. They would then become the evil god's slaves and obtain great power and eternal life. One or two such people might be able to be treated as coincidental mental disorders, but when such people gathered in a group, and when they firmly believed in their faith, and were even willing to sacrifice themselves for the release of the evil god, things would become a little scary. If such an evil god really existed, it would definitely be a great threat to the Norland continent. Or rather, it would be a disaster once it appeared. Bolton was not a coward. As the chief officer of the Grey Temple's intelligence department, he knew better than anyone what it meant for Roland to pay so much attention to a matter and even list it as top secret. "Go and interrogate all the guys we brought back at night. Not only do you want to know their actions and motives, but also their dreams. The real information might be in their dreams." Roland picked out a confession and pushed it to Bolton. Bolton picked up the confession. The main content was a ridiculous dream. A huge, indescribable object was trapped underground by countless chains. There was a cave thousands of meters tall underground and countless dark tunnels. That voice was calling out to him. He didn't know how valuable this ridiculous dream was, but he already knew what Roland's intentions were. The evil god behind these crazy people's dreams was the true goal of their investigation. "Go ahead. We still have a lot of work to do, but we don't have much time left." Roland continued to look down at the confessions and said calmly, "Yes." Bolton turned and left the office. He didn't know how to explain it to his subordinates who were already nervous after being tortured by those guys, but the following interrogation might be even more torturous. The swaying red wine glass, the intoxicating red wine, and the intoxicating beauty couldn't get Meg drunk in the end. After placing Irina, who was in his arms, on the bed gently, and removing her jacket, Meg returned to his room smilingly. He locked the door, closed his eyes, and opened the mutton soup experience bag. "This idiot. I'm so angry." In the room next door, Irina opened her eyes and clenched her fists angrily. Mutton soup could be found almost all over the country, but it had its own characteristics due to the different regions. The mutton soup recipe that the system provided to Meg was said to be a masterpiece that gathered the strengths of various families. Meg actually quite liked mutton soup, but this seemingly simple mutton soup also tested the chef's skills. The mutton had a strong rank odor, and if it wasn't handled well, the soup would have a rank odor, making people stay away from it. The owners of the mutton restaurants that I complained about. Could they be among the cursed chefs? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, feeling that things had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. He wasn't a mean person, but he had higher standards than the average person. He also couldn't stand the attitude of the so-called internet-famous restaurants and old restaurants that didn't cook well with their hearts. He always believed that people shouldn't just say beautiful words. Since he had already spoken, he should speak the truth. Of course, such words might not sound as pleasant to the ears. Anyway, he never cared if others thought it was pleasant to the ears, just like how he couldn't control the mouths of those haters, so why couldn't he speak the truth? "Host, please don't comfort yourself. The dish's completion rate has been set. Please enter the test field for the god of cookery as soon as possible." The system's voice sounded. System, can I apologize here? I feel that my words in the past were indeed a little too much. Why don't you start a live broadcast, and I'll apologize to those chefs that I've hurt?" Meg said with a smile. "Those chefs all expressed that they couldn't forgive you," the system replied. Hee. Meg rolled his eyes. As expected, he secretly raised his middle finger, and said with some disdain, "Isn't it just a perfect mutton soup? You guys are so unambitious that you can't even protect the things left behind by your ancestors. I'll show you what a real mutton soup is." Then, Meg kicked open the door of the test field for the god of cookery. It was very happy inside. This spell formation. Novan stood beside the altar, looking at the spell formation with his brows tightly knitted. At the same time, he had to eliminate the whispers that kept ringing in his ears. "Can it be solved?" Crassus asked nervously. Novan shook his head with a serious expression, and said, "It's very difficult. I don't know much about ancient spell formations. There's too little information left in the world, and the few ruins that are left are also very badly damaged. I'm afraid no one in this world has ever seen a complete ancient spell formation, let alone studied it." Crassus sighed, and said, "If even you can't do it, then I'm afraid no one else can. Nothing is absolute. Perhaps there are people who have studied ancient spell formations. We can gather some spell formation masters to study this seal spell formation and see if we can find a breakthrough." Novan shook his head, and took out a photostone to record a corner of this seal spell formation. "System, where's my sheep? Where's such a big sheep?" The next morning, Meg opened the fridge and roared with his eyes wide open. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1689. Meg looked at the empty spot in the fridge where the mutton was supposed to be. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. An ominous premonition rose from the bottom of his heart. Ding! The missing mutton has triggered a new mission. Host, please go to the blue grassland in the extreme cold of the northwest in 3 days to find and catch a kind of goat called the polar black goat. If the mission is successful, you will obtain the right to use the polar black goat as an ingredient and a mysterious gift. The system's voice sounded. "Damn, you're doing it again." Meg rolled his eyes. He had a premonition that the system was up to something. Sure enough, it didn't ask him to go to the extreme cold of the northwest to pick up goat dung. However, he still had to fly to the extreme cold of the northwest to catch a goat. "Blue grassland? Do you think I'm Grey Wolf?" Meg rolled his eyes and said in a tough tone, "The holiday is over. I don't dare to stand my customers up. If they curse me to be a customer who is always stood up by chefs in my next life, wouldn't I be in trouble?" The 3-day countdown has started. If the mission is failed, the system will take back the right to use the mutton soup recipe, the system replied calmly. Meg frowned and kept silent for a long time. Then he silently raised his middle finger. Convex, who knew how many black goats he had personally slaughtered, how many goat bones he had chopped, and how many mutton slices he had made in order to make a mutton soup that satisfied his picky self. Just to make a bowl of thick white and fragrant mutton soup. He had wanted to get up early to prepare a bowl of warm and delicious mutton soup for everyone, but he didn't expect the system to make a dish of it. "It's okay to do the mission, but at least give me the coordinates. The extreme cold of the northwest has a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers. Where do you want me to find the blue grassland and catch the black goats for you?" Meg complained in his heart. The blue grassland is very conspicuous in the extreme cold of the northwest. I believe the host can find it easily. As for the tracks of the polar black goat, the host may be able to get more useful information from the local herdsman. It's as good as not saying anything. Meg curled his lips. He didn't expect the system to give more hints. After thinking for a while, he wrote a leave of absence notice and hung it at the door. He was going to take another day off. Since he would have to go there sooner or later, it was better to do the mission earlier. "Boss, why are you on leave again?" Phyllis was the first one to arrive at the restaurant. After entering the door, she asked Meg with a puzzled look. "I'll announce it when everyone is here," Meg said with a smile. Everyone arrived one after another, including Shirley, who had officially returned after recovering from her injuries. They all came to the restaurant. Everyone was puzzled by the fact that Meg had just taken a break yesterday, and today, Meg had released a notice to take a break again. "Since you're all here, let me announce the reason for today's holiday." Meg looked at everyone and said with a smile, "I think everyone has been too busy recently. We haven't had the chance to sit down and have a good chat." The new members also haven't had enough opportunities to get to know each other. This is a major flaw in the restaurant's team-building work. So today, I've decided to take a day off and organize a team-building event for everyone in the restaurant. We'll go to the blue grassland in the northwest to play. Amy's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, "Are we going to the grasslands to catch goats?" "Sure." Meg nodded with a smile. "It should be very cold in the northwest now," Elizabeth said with some hesitation. The previous team-building event was at the Demon Islands. Everyone had a good time sunbathing and playing in the water. "Then it's just right to go skiing," Meg said matter-of-factly. Catching goats wasn't a big deal. It might just take a little more time, so it was just right to bring everyone to participate in the team-building event. Angela and Jane weren't familiar with everyone, so it wasn't a bad idea to take this opportunity to improve their friendship. Skiing. Angela and Jane's eyes lit up. The Demon Islands were hot all year round, and they had never seen frost, let alone skiing. The others also showed great interest in this matter. "I have something on today, so I won't be playing with you." Irina drank a bowl of porridge and waved to everyone. She then disappeared from the restaurant in a golden light. Meg knew that she was definitely worried about the thunderstorm mountains, so he didn't ask her to stay. He picked up his bowl and said, "All right, everyone, have your breakfast first and then get ready to head out." "Father, what about me? Can I skip class today and go catch goats?" Amy looked at Meg expectantly and asked. "Meg, do you like to catch goats?" Meg asked with a smile. Yes. Goats are so cute, they must be delicious." Amy nodded and said. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. "Master Julian probably won't have time to go to class today. You don't have to take leave. Amy can go with us." "That's great." Amy jumped up happily. It was great to play for 2 days in a row. After breakfast, Meg brought some snacks and seasonings before leading everyone out. Meg rented a 5th-grade flying mount, the Ironhead Eagle. This flying magical beast that used its head as a weapon almost made him a rare species. It had no other characteristics, but it had a strong carrying capacity. Its flying speed was comparable to a 7th-grade flying magical beast. Its weakness was that it wasn't windproof. This weakness wasn't a problem for Meg and the others. Barbara easily solved it with a windproof barrier. "Actually, I can take everyone there," Yarbemia said as they sat on the eagle's back. "We're out to play today. How can we let Emma tire herself out?" Meg shook his head with a smile. He wasn't a stingy boss. He looked at everyone and said with a smile, "The journey will take about 3 hours. Why don't we play werewolf?" "Werewolf?" Everyone looked at Meg in confusion. Yes, werewolf is a very interesting strategy game. The game is divided into 2 camps, the werewolf camp and the good guy camp. If all the werewolves are eliminated, the good guy camp wins. If all the clerics or civilians are eliminated, the werewolf camp wins. As for the specific rules, as a non-board game enthusiast, Werewolf was one of the few board games that he knew. It was also suitable for such a large group of people. The restaurant was usually busy. Although everyone worked together and lived in the same dormitory, they didn't have much time to communicate. A brand new game was quite a challenge for the ladies. However, amidst all the mistakes, the laughter never stopped. An intense strategy and reasoning game had become a self-destructing game. Between the truth and the lies, Mag, the game provider, had become the worst loser. "Wow, why is that grassland blue?" At this moment, Amy suddenly stood up and pointed into the distance. "Looks like we're here." Meg stood up and looked at the land that was gradually turning blue. His eyes lit up. He didn't expect there to be a blue grassland in the extreme cold of the Northwest. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1690. You vile spawn. How could the young master of the Lewis family be reduced to such a pathetic state for a woman? Can't you be a human? A middle-aged man with neatly combed hair outside Mammis pointed at the despondent Constantine with a pained expression. "Father, you don't understand. I like Miss Shirley. I'm even willing to give up everything for her. I don't care about being the young master of the Lewis family at all, the pale-faced Constantine said affectionately with a hand over his heart. Smack. Kurt raised his hand and slapped Constantine's face. He was shaking with anger as he said, "You call that liking her? You're just lusting after her body. You're despicable." Constantine staggered 2 steps back and looked at Kurt dejectedly. He shook his head and said, "No. It's not like that. She's different. She's different from those women." "Ha, different? Does she have 3 legs, or horns on her head?" Kurt was so angry that he laughed. "I think you've lost your mind. You've lost your appetite for a woman whose whereabouts are unknown. If you continue to be like this, I'll chase you out of the house. I'll take it that I never had a son like you." Words are not enough to describe her beauty. "Father, no matter how you force me, I will never give up on her. She's my white moonlight. She's an irreplaceable woman," Constantine said with determination. He had no intention of backing down. "I didn't expect young Master Constantine, who's known as a veteran in love, to have such an affectionate side. It's really surprising. Hee, all the rich young masters pale in comparison to Mr. Mac. Isn't he asking for trouble if he wants to chase after Mammoth's girl?" "That's true. I heard Mr. Mac has become the most charming man in Chaos City. The City Lord's record of 28 consecutive years has been broken for the first time. But it seems like we haven't seen Miss Shirley for a long time, right?" The customers who were a little depressed because Mammoth was closed for the day couldn't help but discuss softly when they saw this scene. Kurt glared at Constantine angrily before getting into the horse-drawn carriage and leaving. Constantine sat at the entrance of the restaurant for a while before leaving in disappointment. The most painful love in the world was when you were about to give up and the other party suddenly appeared. Just as your hope was rekindled, she disappeared silently once again. His love for Miss Shirley was just like that. "Miss Shirley. I'll always be waiting for you to come back. Next time, I won't miss you," Constantine murmured listlessly. The blue grassland was located in the extreme cold of the northwest region. If it wasn't for a plant called blue silvergrass, its name probably wouldn't have appeared on the map. Along the way to the north, the earth was covered in ice and snow. The northwest region was even colder. Other than ice and snow, there was almost nothing exposed to the outside, let alone any green vegetation. However, there was not a single trace of snow on the blue grassland. The blue-silver vegetation stretched as far as the eye could see. It made the eyes of those who were tired of the snowy scenery brighten. "What a beautiful grassland! The grass is actually blue," Anna exclaimed in surprise. "Then, could the goats be blue too?" Amy poked her head out and scanned the area seriously, trying to find the existence of the goats. Elizabeth also looked down in surprise. She muttered, "The temperature here is higher than other places. It's like spring. Since we've encountered such a special place, let's go down and take a look." Meg rode the iron-head eagle down. He was also a little apprehensive. This grassland was so blue that it didn't look like they would be able to find the polar black goats no matter how he looked at it. Wearing a black leather jacket in such a blue ocean, wouldn't it be looking for food? As they descended, the scenery on the ground gradually became clearer. The blue ocean was formed by a type of light blue grass about 20 centimeters tall. Other than the blue grass, there were other plants growing in intervals. However, because they were not as dense as the blue grass, the entire grassland appeared blue. The huge shadow cast by the iron-head eagle caused the animals on the grassland to panic. A flock of blue goats ran wildly on the grassland. If they weren't close enough, they wouldn't be able to tell that there was a large flock of goats hidden on the grassland. "Wow, it's really blue goats," Amy exclaimed in surprise. She was already rubbing a small fireball in her hand. "There really are blue goats. That's so special." The girls were also looking at the flock of goats in surprise. Goats were not rare animals, but blue goats were different. They had never heard of them before. This is the charm of biological evolution. The goats here have been through natural selection. From the accumulation of small mutations, the blue fur that could protect them was preserved. That's why there are blue goats. Meg wasn't too surprised. Biological evolution was a very miraculous thing. Moreover, There were more than 10 or 100 times more species on the Norland continent than there were on Earth. The girls didn't quite understand Meg's words, but that didn't stop them from thinking that Meg was very knowledgeable. Then, "Father, can we eat these goats?" Amy swallowed her saliva. Her eyes were full of anticipation. The blue silver grass is a rather special plant. It's blue all year round, and it can generate heat by itself. That's why there's this special blue grassland. However, it's not poisonous, so the goats that live on blue silver grass can also eat it. Meg nodded. When he went to rent a flying mount in the morning, Meg bought a map and a brief report on the blue grassland. Because there was almost nothing special about this grassland apart from the blue silver grass, the report was very brief. It didn't even mention the polar black goats. That's great. Amy raised the small fireball in her hand. She was about to release an explosive fireball in the midst of the running goats to eat lunch. Wait. Meg hurriedly stopped the little fellow. He shook his head with a smile and said, "Goats that die from the explosion will be very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, our target isn't this kind of goat, but a type of black goat. That's the most delicious goat on this grassland." Black goat. Amy retracted her hand. She stood on her tiptoes and looked around. She shook her head and said, "But, there aren't even black rocks here. Where are the black goats?" Everyone also looked into the distance. On the vast blue grassland, they could see all kinds of animals running past occasionally. However, they didn't see any black goats. There wasn't even a black wild boar. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1691. The iron-head eagle circled around the blue grassland. Meg focused all his attention on the area below, but he still could not find any trace of the polar black goats. If they really lived in the blue grassland and were about to become a food ingredient for mammoths, then at least there should be an objective amount of them. It shouldn't be that hard to find, right? System, could it be that your information is wrong? Or, did you lose your goats? Meg asked in his mind. Please complete the mission independently. The system replied. Meg rolled his eyes. If the goats weren't in the blue grassland, you would be a dog. Please respect the system. The system is not a dog system. The system said seriously. Hehe, I praised you for raising the goats well, so you are a shepherd dog. Meg laughed. Of course, the system is an all-round god of cookery system, shepherd. The system's voice paused, and suddenly became angry. Isn't a shepherd dog also a dog? I don't know if a shepherd dog is a dog, but you are a real dog. Meg rolled his eyes. In such a big grassland, who knows where the system raised the goats? Look, there are tents there, it seems like there are shepherds. Yarbemia pointed to the right and said. Meg looked in the direction of her finger. It was already near the northwest border of the grassland. In the distance, there was a tall snowy mountain. The melted snow from the snowy mountain converged into a river, meandering into the grassland. The tents sewn from various animal skins were set up along the river's banks. Since there are shepherds, then let's go down and take a look. Maybe they know where to catch the goats. Meg had an idea and signaled the iron-head eagle to descend. Woo! The shrill sound of a horn came from the shepherd's tents. The women and children ran back into the tents. The men held their longbows and spears and came to the front of the tents. They looked at the giant eagle that swooped down with vigilance and fear. In the blue grassland, they had never seen such a huge eagle. The snow eagles they raised were not even as big as one of its claws. However, they had nowhere to retreat. Behind them were their homes and loved ones. Chief, what's that? A young man looked at the old man standing in front of him and asked in a trembling voice. It might have come from the back of the snow mountain. Don't panic. If its target is the sheep, let it eat. If its target is the tent, we have to stop it even if it has to die, Eddie said in a low voice. Yes. The herdsmen replied in unison. However, the giant eagle didn't directly rush towards the tent. Instead, it circled around and slowly landed on a nearby mound. Immediately after, a group of people dismounted from the giant eagle's back. Chief, look, there's someone on the eagle's back. Those people don't seem to be hostile towards us." When the herdsmen saw this scene, they were all shocked. However, their expressions also relaxed a lot. "Don't let your guard down. We still can't be sure if they are good or bad," Eddie said in a low voice. His eyes were as sharp as a falcon's as he stared at the group of people dismounting from the eagle's back. There were a total of 12 people, 1 man, 9 women, and 2 children. Judging from their attire, they didn't seem to belong to the grassland. Being able to tame such a giant eagle as a mount, they definitely weren't ordinary people. They were just an ordinary nomadic tribe on the grassland. How could they afford to offend such people? "They seem to be very afraid of us." Amy hugged Ugly Duckling and looked at the herdsmen who were holding bows and spears in the distance with confusion. "We are clearly so cute." "Meow, meow." Tilda Ugly Duckling acted cute in her arms. Amy glanced at it, and said without hesitation, "That doesn't include you." "Meow." Ugly Duckling was instantly discouraged. It rolled its eyes and lost its dream. "We are considered uninvited guests. It's normal for them to be vigilant. We just have to act normal later." Meg smiled as he led the group in the direction of the tents. These herdsmen didn't look very different from herdsmen from other places. The blue silvergrass provided them with a rich grassland that was hard to find in the northwest, and the snow water solved their drinking water problem. However, perhaps because of the blue silvergrass, these herdsmen's skin had a tinge of blue in addition to being tanned all year round. However, it wasn't to the extent of the Pandora natives. They were basically no different from humans. "Stop! Who are you people? Why are you here?" Eddie shouted loudly. Meg stopped about 20 meters away from those herdsmen, and said with a smile, "Hello, we are here for a holiday. We were attracted by this blue grassland. We have no ill intentions." He was originally worried that these herdsmen didn't know the common language, but it seemed like this older herdsman was proficient in it. Eddie sized up Meg. This young man didn't look like a powerful person. His physique wasn't even as good as the young people in the tribe, and he wasn't equipped with a sword. His smile was gentle, and he didn't look like a bad person. Beside him stood a little girl of about 4 or 5 years old, holding a strange little thing in her arms. Behind him was a group of beautiful women. Yes, very beautiful women. The grassland couldn't produce such beautiful women. Whether it was the cold wind blowing from the snowy mountains or the long day of scorching sun, they all made the women in the grassland lose their exquisiteness. Of course, to be able to have such a group of beautiful women meant that this man must have a very honorable identity. He was definitely not someone a small tribe like theirs could provoke. This was the principle he learned when he was young and adventuring outside. The herdsmen looked at the women behind the man and were a little stunned. This was a beautiful scenery that had never been seen on the grassland, and it was also a beauty that they might never see in their lives. After confirming that the other party wasn't hostile and wasn't someone their tribe could provoke, Eddie put away his longbow and signaled the herdsmen to lower their guard. He put one hand in front of his chest and bowed slightly to Meg. He said respectfully, "Honorable guests, welcome." When the herdsmen saw how humble Eddie was, they hurriedly put away their inappropriate expressions and gazes. They lowered their heads and bowed nervously. "No need to be so polite, we just happened to pass by. We heard that the barbecued mutton on the grassland is very good, so we wanted to try it." Meg said with a smile. Yes, we want to eat sheep, the kind that can run." Amy went forward and pointed at the sheep that were leisurely grazing in the grassland not far away. "What a cute little girl." The herdsmen's eyes lit up when they saw Amy. The herdsmen's children grew up on horseback and crawled and rolled in the grassland. They were all little devils in the mud. They had never seen such a delicate little girl who looked like a snowman. Eddie's eyes lit up and he patted his chest confidently. "Barbecued mutton, this is what the Buck tribe is best at. Honorable guests, please come in. I'll ask my tribesmen to slaughter the mutton and roast it for you personally." Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1692. The girls all looked at Meg. There was a top chef here. Was Eddie going to show off his skills in roasting mutton in front of Meg? Meg nodded expectantly. Then I'll have to trouble you. Most of the herdsmen in the grasslands were experts in roasting meat. Regardless of whether it was the whole roasted mutton in Inner Mongolia or the red willow roasted meat of the Luobu people, as long as they were lucky, they could always taste delicacies that could not be tasted in the city. Meg had learned how to roast mutton skewers and roast pig's eyes, but he did not dare to say that he was an expert in roasting meat. He had only learned a little because of the system. If he could learn a thing or two from a real expert, it would naturally be best. The biggest change to him after coming to this world was that he had learned to humble himself. In the past, he had always felt that he did not have any goals to strive for in this life, and that he only lived to do as he pleased. But it was different now. He had truly seen the depth of the chef profession. It was like a vast sea of stars. If he wanted to become a bright star in it, he had to constantly learn and improve. Guests, this way please. Eddie led Meg and the others into a large tent. The interior of the tent was very simple. The blue-silver grass on the ground had been cut, and the mud was simply compacted. There was only one heatable brick bed. The families had brought in small stools, and they barely managed to gather 12 of them. The sheepskin tent blocked out the wind and was quite warm, but there was a slight stench of livestock. This was not a big deal to the herdsmen. Cows and sheep rolled around in the field, so they could not avoid this smell. But to Meg and the others, this smell was somewhat unfriendly. Distinguished guests, please wait here for a moment. I will roast mutton for everyone. The whole roasted mutton is the main feast, but it will take a long time to roast. I will roast some mutton for all of you to eat in a while. Eddie arranged everything for Meg and the others, and then had a few clever girls accompany them in the tent. It's the smell of sheep. Amy sniffed and looked around. She did not seem to dislike it. Not long after, a few herdsmen came in with ceramic bowls and handed bowls of steaming goat milk to Meg and the others. They smiled and gestured for them to drink. Although these herdsmen did not speak the common language, their warm smiles were infectious. It was hard to refuse their hospitality, or perhaps the thick warm milk fragrance was too tempting. Everyone picked up the goat's milk and drank it. Meg had drunk goat's milk on the grassland. The goat's milk was processed by the herdsman, and even after it was boiled, it still had a bit of rank odor. It was not as good as one would imagine. However, the goat's milk this time was somewhat out of his expectations. The rank odor of the goat milk had been handled very well, and he almost couldn't feel its existence. Or it could be said that the goat milk itself didn't have any rank odor. It was warm, fresh, and sweet, and was completely different from the goat milk he had drunk in the past. Once it entered his stomach, he felt warm all over and the fragrance lingered in his lips and teeth. Good milk. Meg's eyes lit up and he couldn't help but praise. Camilla and Angela looked up at Meg at the same time. Good goat's milk. Meg added without blushing or skipping a beat. It was a close call. He almost said something that his mother didn't allow him to say. Gulp, gulp. The delicious goat's milk quickly entered everyone's stomachs. The originally restrained feeling was also broken by this warm bowl of goat's milk. Seeing this scene, the herdsman also smiled proudly. The Buck tribe only produced the best goat's milk. Amy put down the empty bowl and licked the corner of her mouth with her little tongue. She expectantly said, "The goat's milk is so good. The roast goat must be very delicious too." Meg passed the empty bowl to the herdsman to express his gratitude. Then, he stood up and said, "I want to see them roast the goat. Do you want to come?" "I want to go," Amy said as she raised Ugly Duckling. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling, who had just fallen asleep, squinted its eyes with a puzzled expression. "I want to go too. Big sister Shirley, let's go too." Anna stood up and held Shirley's hand. This was her first time coming to the grassland. She wanted to go out and play. It would be even better if she could ride a horse. "All right." Shirley stood up. "Let's go too. It must be great to be able to play on the grassland," Mia said with a smile as she pulled Elizabeth up. "All right. Let's go then." Meg nodded and led them out of the tent. Although this place was close to the snowy mountains, and the temperature was relatively lower, the temperature was still about 10 degrees Celsius because of the blue-silver grass. To the people who came from Chaos City, which was covered in ice and snow, this temperature was not a problem at all. Furthermore, the fresh air on the grassland, the snowy mountains that were half covered by the clouds in the distance, and the blue sky were all very refreshing. Compared to the dim tent that had a slight smell of goat, everyone obviously preferred the outdoors. Meg used his body language to express that they wanted to see the process of roasting the goat. The herdsman who understood him immediately brought them to the back of the tent. A group of herdsmen was busy slaughtering, bleeding, and skinning the goat. Not far away, a few herdsmen had started a fire and were throwing thick wood into it. The arrival of Meg and the rest immediately attracted everyone's attention. Many people stopped what they were doing and smiled at Meg and the rest in a friendly manner. Eddie had just bled a goat when he heard the commotion. He put down the knife and turned around to look at Meg and the rest in surprise. "Honorable guests, why are you here? Please wait in the tent. The roast goat will be done very soon." "It's all right. We are more interested in the process of roasting the goat, so we want to see how you roast the goat personally," Meg said with a smile. His gaze was already attracted to the black goat that was still struggling after its neck was slit. He had slaughtered thousands of polar black goats in the God of Cookery's space last night. With just one look, he could be 100% sure that the black goat that was about to die was the target that he had been looking for. "System, come out and take a look. I've found this polar black goat," Meg said proudly. He had really searched high and low for it, only to find it by chance. Before he could even ask, the goat had come knocking on his door. "The search for the polar black goat has been completed. Host, please personally capture a polar black goat. Only then will the mission be considered complete," the system replied. "Okay," Meg agreed in a relaxed tone. Since these herdsmen could capture a polar black goat, they definitely knew where to find them. Capturing one was naturally not difficult at all. Why is this goat different from the ones we saw just now? Could it be that it's not a breed from the grasslands? Meg walked forward and asked curiously as he looked at the black goat. "You have a good eye. This black goat is indeed not a goat from our grasslands. It only appears on the snowy mountains and can run on the steep cliffs as if it was flying. It's extremely difficult to capture. However, its meat is incomparable to that of ordinary mutton. It's simply the best among goats," Eddie said with a smile. "This one was caught by the trap we set up on the mountain yesterday. We're preparing to roast it for our guests." Chapter 1693. System, you purposely misled me by providing false information. Meg could not help but complain in his heart when he heard Eddie's words. Black mountain goats were indeed not produced in the blue grassland, but in the snowy mountains outside the grassland. If they had not met this group of herdsmen, they would not have been able to find a single black mountain goat even if they turned the entire blue grassland upside down. The system has already violated the rules by providing the host with information about the blue grassland. The host actually repaid kindness with enmity and framed me. This is truly heartbreaking, the system said solemnly. "Come on, you." Meg rolled his eyes. He did not believe the system's nonsense. However, since the location of the black mountain goats had been confirmed, the mission was already half completed. "This goat is so precious. How can we enjoy it?" Meg looked at Eddie and said embarrassedly. The herdsman's enthusiasm was indeed extraordinary, which made him feel a little embarrassed. "It is our tribe's honor to be able to provide food for our esteemed guests," Eddie said with a smile. It had been many years since so many guests had come to the grassland. Moreover, the Buck tribe was indeed a generous tribe. They were not stingy with their guests and would take out the best food to entertain them. Meg smiled and said, "Then please continue. I am quite interested in roasting mutton. Can I watch you roast it?" Eddie was slightly surprised that with Meg's status, he would be interested in something as lowly as roasting mutton. However, all important people had strange hobbies, so he did not ask much and nodded. "Of course, please." As the chief of the Buck tribe, Eddie was also the best roaster in the tribe. A goat, no matter how fat or thin it was, would always be roasted to perfection in Eddie's hands. This kind of skill could only be compared to the previous chief. The goat with 3 legs tied up quickly lost its strength to struggle. The blood had already been drained. Eddie squatted down and made a cut on the goat's leg. Then, he puffed up his cheeks and blew with all his might. The goat's skin bulged from the wind. Eddie raised his knife and the entire piece of goat's skin was peeled off in no time. Meg looked at this scene with some admiration. The wisdom of the herdsman was admirable. Of course, he didn't use this method to peel the skin. He used a fat head fish, pulled up a corner of the skin, and slowly peeled along the skin. He could also peel off a complete piece of sheepskin, and the speed was much faster than this. Most importantly, he didn't need to use his mouth. The black mountain goat was skinned, revealing the meat inside. It was lean and strong, with almost no fat to be seen. This was something that reared sheep could not compare to. After washing the mutton with ice water from the river, Eddie rubbed a handful of coarse salt and a type of spice that Meg had never seen before. Eddie then propped up the whole mutton with 3 pieces of wood and placed it directly on the charcoal grill that had already been prepared. Keep an eye on it. If anything goes wrong, you won't be able to eat dinner tonight. Eddie handed the whole roasted lamb to a young man. All right, there's no mistake. Alfonso agreed with a silly smile. As he carefully turned the grill, he secretly glanced at Meg with some envy in his eyes. This is my grandson, Alfonso. He's young, but he grew up beside the grill. His barbecue skills are better than most of the men in the tribe. Eddie introduced him to Meg with some pride. Young and promising. Mag nodded with a smile. He also took a few more glances at Alfonso. This young man did look a little like Eddie. His black curly hair was draped over his shoulders, and compared to the other herdsmen of his age, there seemed to be a glow in his brown eyes, which made him look a little different. The whole roasted lamb will take some time. Let me roast some mutton for our distinguished guests first. Eddie carried a dagger and walked towards a row of short trees at the side of the open space. Those trees were not tall, but their branches were very strong. The slender branches intertwined with each other, and the leaves were red like maple leaves. Meg recalled that the juice that Eddie used to wipe the whole lamb seemed to have been mashed up by these leaves. The 3 pieces of wood that served as the frame seemed to have been made from the main trunk of these short trees. Eddie used the dagger to chop off a large number of branches. He used the dagger to peel off the skin of the branches, and a faint fragrance wafted over. What is this? Meg asked curiously. The first thing that came to mind was the red willow. The authentic red willow barbecue was one of the best barbecued meats. The red willow twigs that pierced through the meat skewers were a natural spice. The barbecued meat was completely different from the meat that was barbecued with bamboo skewers. This is the branch of the barker tree. Our Buck tribe uses it to roast meat. The roasted mutton is even tastier. Eddie washed the peeled branches in a wooden basin and said with a smile, "Once you leave the grasslands, you won't be able to taste this in other places." That is indeed good stuff. Meg nodded. Its effects were roughly the same as the red willow branches. Moreover, the fragrance from the branches was a natural spice. The whole black goat was already on the grill, so Eddie caught another strong blue shepherd goat and slaughtered it. He chose the fresh meat from the goat's hind legs and upper head, cut them into cubes, and skewered them with the sharpened barker tree branches. 5 or 6 pieces of meat were skewered on each branch, and each piece was 3 centimeters square. The charcoal was lined up in a row in the mud pit. Stones were piled up, and the mutton skewers were lined up one by one. The barbecue on the grasslands was not that particular. It looked simple, but the whole process made people feel that each piece of meat was as real as the meat. The branches that had just been cut off from the trees had been soaked in water for a while, so there was no need to worry that they would burn off before the mutton was cooked. The red charcoal emitted a decent temperature, and the fat and lean mutton soon began to sizzle with oil, emitting the fragrance of roasted meat. The mutton on the blue grasslands did not have a rank odor. Meg already knew this after drinking the goat's milk. However, this mutton that was almost unprocessed was roasted directly on the charcoal fire. It was indeed a very advanced barbecue method. He didn't dare to roast beef skewers so casually, because it was more about the control of the heat and the mutton. If there was a slight mistake, The big piece of mutton would either be undercooked on the inside or charred on the outside. Mia and the others also gathered around. There had to be something good about a barbecue that could make Meg so focused on it. Furthermore, the fragrance of the barbecue was getting stronger, and everyone finally felt a little hungry after flying for a few hours. It would be best if they could have a few big meat skewers like this to satisfy their cravings before eating the whole roasted goat. Wow, this barbecue smells so good. It must be delicious when it's done. Amy licked her lips and squatted beside the fire expectantly. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling reached out its paw, eager to try. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1694. The wind blowing from the glacier carried a slight chill as it gently caressed the blue-silver grass. The warm sunlight shone on them, making it hard to tell whether it was winter or spring. On the simple grill made of stone, the mutton was slowly being roasted to a brown color. The aroma of the barbecued meat was released continuously along with the sizzling sound of oil. It was only sprinkled with a handful of coarse salt without any spices or condiments, but the aroma of the barbecued meat was exceptionally rich and enticing. It was not inferior to Meg's beef kebab at all. What kind of sheep is this? Meg could not help but ask curiously. This is a blue sheep. Eddie flipped the mutton kebab quickly as he introduced it with a smile. This is a sheep unique to our blue grassland. Only sheep that eat blue-silver grass will not have any rank odor. A lazy sheep. Seems like this little sheep is very lazy. Amy was deep in thought as she tiptoed to look around. Let me take a look. That sheep is so lazy. This won't do. Let's catch it and barbecue it. This is really a paradise. Meg smiled. The Northwest was an extremely cold place with snow and ice everywhere. It had always been a forgotten place. Even the racial war that swept across the entire Norland continent back then did not affect this place. The war was nothing more than a fight for resources and territory. There were many unclaimed lands in the Northwest, but no race would want such unclaimed lands. The blue grassland was obviously an unexpected existence. However, there were no decent magic beasts in this grassland apart from blue silvergrass and sheep. To the various races, it was obviously not a place worth occupying. The mutton kebab is ready. Please try it. Eddie placed a big bunch of mutton kebab on a wooden tray, and passed it to Meg and the rest with a smile. The original freshly shaved tree branches and the rough meat pieces made the mutton kebab give off a grassland's original vibe. The oily reddish-brown meat pieces gave off a mouth-watering aroma. I want a kebab. Amy looked at the mutton kebab on the plate and swallowed her saliva as she raised her hand. It looks delicious. Anna's Adam's apple bobbed as she stared at the meat kebab. Come on. 1 kebab per person. It's enough. Meg smiled as he distributed the meat kebab to everyone. There were exactly 12 kebab. Because the meat was cut into large pieces, it was almost as big as a leg of lamb. Be careful. It's hot. Blow on it before eating, Meg reminded Amy and Anna. Mari replied as she took a bite of the mutton. Oh, Mi's eyes suddenly lit up. She chewed happily like a rabbit. Her eyes and eyebrows curved into crescent moons. She looked happy and satisfied, raising people's expectations for the mutton skewers. Mi always praised all kinds of food. Even if it was a hard biscuit, she could still crunch it like a little squirrel, making people believe that it was delicious. But when she showed this kind of expression, it must be when she ate something really delicious. It was very believable. Meg blew on the first piece of mutton, then took a big bite. The surface of the mutton was slightly charred, but it was full of juice after biting into it. It didn't have the rank odor of mutton. It only had the fresh, sweet, and milky aroma of goat's milk, mixed with a faint fragrance. The saltiness was just a supplement. The aroma brought the delicious taste of the mutton to another level. With his eyes closed, Meg could almost see the fat blue sheep strolling leisurely on the blue grassland. The wind blowing in his face carried the fragrance of the grass. The more he chewed, the more fragrant the mutton became. He was so happy that he almost chewed his tongue to pieces. This mutton kebab is amazing, Meg opened his eyes and gave Eddie a thumbs up. He had to admit that this was the most delicious mutton kebab he had ever eaten. "This mutton is delicious," Mia said with her mouth full. Her face was full of surprise. As a staunch beef kebab fan, I also agree that this mutton kebab is delicious. Barbara nodded. She then took a big bite of the mutton and chewed happily. She began to seriously consider whether she should switch to the mutton kebab fan. Everyone praised from the bottom of their hearts. No one would have thought that they would be able to eat such delicious food in the grassland of the Northwest. Ding. The host has for the first time in this world sincerely praised other people's food. You have triggered a hidden mission. You are hereby rewarded with a mutton kebab recipe. At this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. That works. Meg was stunned for a moment. He looked at the glittering experience bag that appeared in his mind in disbelief. Is this a fake recipe? Meg asked tentatively. How could the system be so kind as to exchange a compliment for a recipe? Please don't question the professionalism of the system, the system said solemnly. Praising others is an excellent quality. As a candidate for the god of cookery, you must learn to be humble and praise others. Only by acknowledging the excellence of others can you give yourself a wider space for growth. All right, then I'll accept it. Meg raised his eyebrows. There was no reason for him to reject a mutton kebab recipe that was delivered to his door. This was the king of the barbecue world. Now that he had taken it under his wing, it couldn't be better. As long as everyone likes it. Eddie listened to everyone's praises, and a smile bloomed on his face. His hands flipping the mutton kebab became much smoother. A mutton kebab skewered with about half a kati of mutton. Everyone felt a little full after eating the kebab. However, it wouldn't be too much to have a few more kebab skewers of such exotic delicacies. Everyone gathered around the fire to warm themselves, eat the mutton kebab skewers, and drink the sheep's milk wine brewed by the herdsman. They watched the herdsman sing and dance, and the atmosphere of the holiday gradually thickened. Shirley borrowed a horse from the herdsman, and rode with Anna. Amy, on the other hand, found a sheep, and threw Ugly Duckling on its head. She climbed up herself, and rode the sheep to chase after Shirley and the rest. Yarbemia and the rest also went out for a walk and play. It was rare for them to have such good weather and environment. They chatted and played, and gradually got familiar with each other and became more harmonious. Meg didn't follow them. Instead, he found a piece of dry wood, and sat by the fire to watch Eddie and Alfonso roast the whole mutton. Meg looked at Eddie, who was flipping the whole mutton, and casually asked, "Grandpa, you went to the south when you were young?" "Yes. When I was young, I went out to explore for 10 odd years. The furthest I went was Chaos City, and I stayed there for 3 years. I missed home, so I came back." Eddie nodded. There was a hint of reminiscence in his eyes, and the corners of his lips curled up subconsciously. Alfonso, on the other hand, was sizing up Meg carefully with anticipation in his eyes. Grandpa had taught him the common language. Although he couldn't speak it fluently, he could understand Meg's words. He liked to hear about everything outside the grasslands, and also yearned to leave the grasslands one day to explore the south like his grandpa. No pop-up window. Chapter 1695. Meg and Eddie chatted casually about the changes in Chaos City, life on the grassland, and how vast the outside world was. Talking to the elderly would always give Meg some insights that had been accumulated over the years. Even though he was just a herdsman who had gone on a long journey when he was young, he still benefited a lot from the conversation. Alfonso listened quietly at the side, and added charcoal to the grill from time to time. His eyes were staring at Meg most of the time, and there seemed to be light shining in them. According to this distinguished guest, the outside world was even more vast and exciting than what his grandfather had described. There were giant dragons flying in the sky, tree people as tall as hills, dwarfs who were good at construction and forging, and huge cities built on flat land. It has been a few decades, and the outside world has changed drastically. The herdsmen on the grassland are still grazing slowly, and nothing has changed. It's a pity that the young people in the tribe don't have any other skills apart from grazing. They can't even leave the grassland, Eddie lamented. The people outside are envious of your carefree life, but you are also envious of the colorful world outside. It's hard to say what the world is like. Meg's gaze went over the bonfire and looked at the young people who were wrestling not far away. Such a simple smile and such a simple life were not easy to find in the outside world. Eddie looked at Meg in shock. After pondering for a while, he nodded shamefully and said, "I was greedy." Meg smiled and didn't continue Eddie's words. His gaze landed on Alfonso at the side. He had felt Eddie's gaze just now, so he asked with a smile, "Do you want to see the outside world?" Alfonso was stunned. He stood up hurriedly and nodded at Meg. Then, he replied in the common language that wasn't very standard, "Yes." Mag smiled as he looked at Alfonso's helpless hands. He took out a money pouch and took out 10 dragon coins and 10 gold coins from it. Then, he wrote an address on a piece of paper with a pen that he always carried with him and handed it to Alfonso. "When you can communicate with your grandfather fluently in the common language, if you still want to see the outside world, you can find me at this address." Alfonso's expression gradually became emotional. His hand that was holding the dragon coin was trembling. He bowed deeply to Meg and said gratefully, Thank you. You can't do that, customer. Alfonso can't afford to take so much money." Eddie hurriedly stood up and wanted to return the money to Meg. It's normal for young people to want to see the outside world, just like how you walked out of the grassland back then. Meg pressed down on Eddie's hand gently. He smiled at Alfonso and said, "Besides, if young people from the grassland want to live well in the outside world, they don't have to be good at fighting and killing." Times have changed. As long as he can learn how to roast mutton, I will make arrangements for him in Chaos City. Eddie's heart softened when he saw Alfonso's expectant gaze. How could he not know what his grandson was thinking? Alfonso had tried to run away from home many times since he was young. This was exactly the same as him back then. "Then, I'll have to trouble you when the time comes." Eddie bowed deeply to Meg. "You're welcome. Take it as my reward for this whole roast mutton." Meg smiled as he looked at the whole roast mutton that had turned golden brown on the grill. Compared to the previous roast mutton skewers, the aroma of this whole roast mutton was more unrestrained. It was different from the aroma of the blue sheep. The aroma of this roast mutton was more layered and lingered for a long time. Eddie flipped the roast mutton and looked up at Meg as he said, "Sir, this mutton is almost done. Do you want to eat it now?" "Of course, it's best to eat it now." Meg nodded with a smile. He got up and called everyone back to eat the whole roast mutton. "This sheep is so lazy. It's just like an ugly duckling. It can't catch up with big sister Anna and the others no matter how hard it tries." Amy sat on the sheep's back and pouted in disdain. "Matilda meow tilda, that sheep and ugly duckling," meowed innocently. Meg looked at that fat sheep that was tamed, and was a little surprised at how Amy managed to convince it. Riding horses is so fun. Anna was carried off the horse by Shirley with an excited smile on her little face. Mia and the rest walked back, chatting and laughing. Angela and Jane were obviously much closer to everyone. They also had smiles on their faces, and looked very harmonious. "It smells so good." Amy jumped down from the sheep's back, and looked at the whole roast mutton that was glistening with golden oil on the grill. She swallowed her saliva and said, "Roasting a lazy sheep like this is so gluttonous. It's so cruel. But I like it so much. Wash your hands first, and then we can start eating." Meg took a wooden basin filled with warm water from a herdsman at the side, and called Amy over to wash her hands. After everyone had washed their hands, Eddie gave everyone a short knife. When they ate roasted lamb on the grassland, they would use a knife directly. However, it was a little inconvenient for the 2 children and the girls to use a hot roasted lamb that had just been roasted. Meg brought his own knife. He unsheathed fathead fish and cut a plate of mutton for everyone. The meat was connected to the bone, and it was much easier to eat. "Father, can I have a leg of mutton?" Amy asked as she stared at a leg of mutton. "Of course." Meg raised his knife and cut off a leg of mutton for Amy, and handed it to Amy. The little girl was still growing, and her appetite was comparable to 2 or 3 normal adults. "Thank you." Amy took the leg of mutton and happily gnawed on it. Only then did Mag cut a kilogram of mutton for himself and put it on his plate. He had already paid for the whole roast mutton earlier. It was 11,000 copper coins for a whole roast mutton, so he had no qualms about dealing with this roast mutton. Eddie looked at this scene with some surprise. This was a little different from how they ate whole roast mutton, but he was very tactful and did not ask too much. Perhaps this was a habit of the distinguished guests. Of course, what surprised him even more was Mag's knife skills. Mag's hands didn't look like they were used for manual labor, but he was able to wield such a wide and thick square knife. As someone who had dealt with sheep his entire life, he was stunned. Meg picked up a piece of mutton with skin, meat, and bones in his hand. The mouth-watering aroma accompanied by the heat hit his nostrils. The golden skin of the mutton was glistening with oil, and the mutton had also turned brown. The fragrance of barker wood leaves was mixed in. Without any hesitation, Meg took a bite of the mutton. Crunch! The charred skin made a crisp sound as he chewed. The charred aroma immediately filled his mouth. The heat was just right, giving it the most charming texture and taste. It was not inferior to the duck skin of Peking duck. Under the charred skin, the mutton was extraordinarily fresh and tender. The rich oil under the skin gave the mutton good protection, so it did not lose its soul under the high-temperature roasting. Instead, it was sublimated. The freshness and sweetness of the mutton was even better than the previous mutton skewers. In addition to the fragrance of the barker wood leaves, the meat also had a faint fragrance. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. His taste buds had already surrendered. The wonderful taste made him immerse himself in it. Chapter 1696. Meg had eaten many roasted whole goats before. He had left his footprints on the Mongolian grasslands and even been to Whaley County in the Gobi Desert, but none of them could compare to this polar black goat roasted by Eddie. Everyone didn't say anything, but they made quite a commotion as they ate the meat. A sizable plate of mutton was finished in no time. This was the greatest respect for roasted mutton. Eddie had a smug smile on his face. Even a distinguished guest from afar would fall in love with his roasted whole goat. After finishing a few kilograms of mutton, Meg put down the plate and seriously said to Alfonso, "Remember to master your grandfather's cooking skills before you come. I will arrange a job for you when we reach Chaos City." Praises obviously couldn't trigger the system to give him the recipe for the roasted whole goat. It was such a pity that such a delicacy could only be left in the blue grassland. Hence, Meg had his eyes set on Alfonso. Millimeter chem. Alfonso nodded seriously. The scrumptious roasted whole goat made Meg and the rest's trip to the grassland a perfect sublimation. Meg expressed his gratitude to Eddie and the other herders again. He left behind 2 bags of salt that were not easy to obtain in the grassland, and left with everyone. Amy snuggled comfortably in Meg's arms, and worriedly asked him, "I'm so full. Is the remaining leg of mutton still good when we get back?" Millimeter chem. We can just roast it again when we get back. There won't be much difference. Meg shook his head with a smile. The little fellow insisted on bringing the remaining leg of mutton back because she thought it was delicious. They would roast it again when they got back. The taste would definitely not be as good as when it was freshly roasted, but it wouldn't be too bad either. That's great. Amy's eyes narrowed into slits as she turned to look outside. Then, where are we going now? Are we going back? Didn't we say we were going skiing? Yes. We are going skiing now, and catching a black goat. We will make mutton soup for all of you when we get back. Meg smiled and nodded. He glanced at the fat blue sheep tied behind the eagle's back. Those were the local specialties that Edie had given them. They would be good for making mutton skewers when they returned. Since he already had the recipe, Meg did not refuse. Are we going to slide down from that tall snow mountain? Anna pointed at the snow mountain that was getting closer and closer. She was a little scared. I'm afraid this side won't do. Let's wait until we catch some goats and climb over this snowy mountain. Perhaps there will be a more suitable place. Meg shook his head. The snow mountain facing the grassland was full of steep cliffs, and the snow at the bottom of the snow mountain had melted long ago. It was full of black rocks that were almost 90 degrees vertical. Before leaving, Meg asked Eddie. Eddie had set a trap on this cliff to catch the black mountain goat. The black mountain goat was very vigilant and could only be caught once or twice a year. Meg and the others were very lucky to have encountered it. Meg rode the iron-headed eagle and flew close to the cliff. Its huge wings scattered the clouds and revealed the black rocks in front of everyone. "Look, there really is a goat flying on the cliff," Mia suddenly exclaimed as she pointed diagonally upwards. Everyone looked in the direction she was pointing at. A black mountain goat was jumping and climbing up the almost vertical cliff. Its 4 legs were using the narrow gaps and slightly protruding rocks between the cliff for support. It looked like it was flying on the cliff. "That's it." Meg's eyes lit up. He pulled the iron-headed eagle up and said to Barbara at the same time, "Barbara, use spatial magic to confine it and bring it to the eagle's back." "Okay." Barbara raised her hand. The black mountain goat that was jumping up suddenly froze and hovered in the air. Its 4 legs kicked powerlessly in the air. It then fell in despair and was pulled onto the eagle's back. "Perfect." Meg looked at the black mountain goat tied up with the 2 blue goats and smiled. "Ding. Congratulations, host. You have successfully completed the mission of capturing the polar black mountain goat. You have obtained the right to use the polar black mountain goat as an ingredient." The system's voice sounded. "Let's go skiing." Meg pulled the iron-headed eagle deeper and stopped at the peak of the snowy mountain. On the other side of the mountain, there was a snowy slope that extended downwards. In the distance, there was still a vast expanse of snowy mountains. "I'll bring you guys skiing." Elizabeth waved her hand, and a huge ice sleigh appeared on the ground. She then landed on the sleigh lightly. "Wow, it looks so good. It's like crystal." Amy was the first to jump down. Ugly Duckling followed suit. However, because the ice surface was too slippery, it landed on its face and slid down to Amy's feet. Everyone got on the sleigh. Meg let the iron-headed eagle follow and also jumped onto the sleigh. "Sit tight," Elizabeth reminded them. Her body swayed forward, and the ice sleigh that was parked immediately slid down, and it was getting faster and faster. Screams instantly sounded in the mountains. In the magic potion shop, 1111 handed a hot towel to Lulu, and asked curiously, "Lulu, why are you back so early today?" Lulu used the hot towel to wipe her face that was full of soot, and then wiped her hands. She looked at 1111 with a smile, and said, "I finished my work early today, so I came back early." "Then wait a moment. I'll go and cook for you." 1111 took the towel from Lulu and turned to walk towards the kitchen. "Wait a minute, 1111. Actually, Lulu stopped 1111, and her big hands searched in her clothes. 1111 turned to look at her, a little puzzled. "Found it." Lulu pulled out his hand, clenched it into a fist, and handed it to 1111. Then, he opened his palm. An exquisite silver ring appeared in the middle of his palm. It was a slender ring, and the surface of the ring was a light golden amber. In the amber, there was a very small branch, just like a small tree. "This is..." 1111's eyes lit up. She looked at the ring and said in surprise, "Is this for me? Today is your birthday. This time, I can finally spend it with you." Lulu looked at her gently. Then, he took her hand carefully, and put the ring on her finger. The size was just right. It was exquisite and cute on 1111's slender and delicate finger. 1111 looked at the exquisite ring on her finger. Even the edge of the ring had been polished until it was as smooth as a mirror. His clumsy hands must have suffered a lot to make such an exquisite ring. She didn't know how much time he had spent on this outside of his busy work. Thinking of this, 1111 felt a lump in her throat, and her eyes gradually turned red. She looked up and met Lulu's gentle eyes. She couldn't help but laugh and hit his chest lightly. She complained, "Idiot, as long as you're with me, I'll be very happy." Lulu touched his head with a silly smile. His wife looked so beautiful when she was angry. "Actually, I also have something to tell you." 1111 walked a little closer. She touched her belly with one hand, blinked slightly, and said with a slightly red face, "We seem to be having a baby. In the wonderful book house." Chapter 1697. Lulu stared at 1111 in a daze for a while before he came back to his senses. He said in surprise and joy, "1111, you mean you're pregnant?" "Yes." 1111 nodded shyly. However, she could not help but look up at Lulu. Her eyes were also filled with joy. "I wasn't sure a few days ago, but the World Tree gave me feedback today. There's a little life in my stomach. That's our child." "That's great." Lulu opened his arms and hugged 1111. However, he immediately let go of his hands. He was afraid that he would hurt 1111 and the child in her stomach. He just looked at 1111 with a silly smile like a child. For a moment, he did not know where to put his hands. "Touch it." 1111 smiled as she grabbed his big hands and gently placed them on her stomach. Although there was no sign of a bump, the two of them treated it as if it was a treasure. Lulu squatted down and pressed his ear gently against 1111's stomach. He closed his eyes and listened carefully. "Let me listen and see if our child has anything to say to us." 1111 touched Lulu's head gently with her hand. Her smile was filled with happiness. Perhaps only they knew how rare this child was and how much it meant to them. They once thought that they would never be able to have a child. The Druid lineage would be completely cut off in their hands. "Hey, Mr. Mac is too capricious, isn't he?" In the past, when he took leave during holidays, at least the designated hot pot area would continue to operate. Today, we can't even eat hot pot. Hot pot is nothing. The Mana Hot Pot restaurant in front is opened by Mr. Mac's designated hot pot chef. The ingredients are slightly inferior to Mama's hot pot, but they each have their own merits. The key is that the price is cheap. It's almost 1/10 of Mama's. "Alright, we'll settle for the next best thing. Let's go and try Mana Hot Pot restaurant today." Outside the restaurant, the excited customers looked at the closed door and complained helplessly. They had no choice but to head to Mana Hot Pot restaurant for their hot pot. No one knew that Meg and the others had actually returned from their vacation happily and were having a lively barbecue dinner in the restaurant. The 3 goats brought back from the blue grassland were the main characters of the night. The blue goats were made into skewers. Even the wooden skewers used to skewer the meat were made from barker wood that Meg had specially brought back. As it was his first time roasting mutton, he wasn't very confident, so he cut the mutton into pieces that were about the same size as the beef kebab. This way, he could control the heat better. As for the polar black goat, it had been tamed by Amy as a mount on the way here. When she returned to the restaurant at night to slaughter the goat, she was in a dilemma. "Little Black, although we had a lot of fun at noon, and you're smarter than Ugly Duckling, it's already night time. We're hungry, so we can only eat you." Amy patted the black goat's head and comforted it. "Don't be sad, I'll enjoy you." The black goat licked Amy's hand, then walked resolutely towards Meg, who was holding the vegetable leaves. "The mutton soup is boiling in the pot. The grill at home is a little small, so we can't roast a whole goat, so we can only roast half a goat. The roasting method is a little different from what we had at the grassland this afternoon. Let's try it out later." Meg placed the grill in the middle of the restaurant. The tables and chairs were moved to the side, and the 3 long tables were joined together to form a long table for everyone. Barbecuing in the kitchen by himself made him feel like a chef, not a member of a barbecue party. Furthermore, barbecue was all about the smell of smoke and fire. If everything was prepared and served to the table, the taste would be gone, and they would have to watch the meat slowly cook on the grill. Today's mutton was the main character, but of course, they couldn't just eat mutton. Pig's eyes, beef, these were just supporting roles. Although she missed the trip, Irina didn't miss this barbecue. She was eating fruit and patiently listening to Amy talk about the interesting things that happened during the trip today. When she heard something funny, she would laugh with Amy. The charcoal in the grill was already burning red. Meg brushed a layer of oil on the grill and started to put the mutton on it. Sizzle tilde. When the mutton came into contact with the hot grill, it immediately began to emit oil, and the aroma of the meat also spread. Compared to the original method of eating the mutton on the grassland, where only a handful of salt was sprinkled, Meg used more force. When he sprinkled chili powder and cumin powder, it was as if he had injected a soul into it. The gentle aroma suddenly became sharp and irresistible. Everyone who was originally chatting was attracted by the mutton skewers on the grill. Although they had eaten a lot of mutton skewers at noon, the smell of Meg's mutton skewers was even more invasive. Just smelling the aroma made their mouths salivate. Watching the mutton skewers slowly change on the grill, the process was both pleasing to the eye and torturous. "Okay, try the first mutton skewers I've ever made." Meg gathered the mutton skewers on the grill and placed them on 3 long wooden trays. He handed them to Mia, who had been waiting for a long time. "It looks great." Mia smiled and placed the trays on the 3 tables. This way, no one would have to get up to take it. "Let me try." Amy couldn't wait to grab a mutton skewer. She only hurriedly blew on it a few times before putting it into her mouth and taking a bite. Compared to the rough way the herdsman on the grassland ate, Meg's mutton skewers were more delicate in size. Moreover, he only used meat and didn't keep the bones, so it was more convenient to eat. Oh, the mutton that father roasted is also delicious. Amy chewed on the mutton happily. She didn't forget to pick up another skewer and pass it to Irina, who was sitting next to her. "Sister Irina, try it too. It's really super delicious." "Okay, I'll try it." Irina took the mutton skewers. Looking at the color, the surface was slightly brown. Smelling it, the aroma of the meat assailed her nostrils. The spices were tempting. Her delicate red lips blew on the first mutton before taking a bite. This taste. The surface of the mutton was slightly charred, but the texture wasn't hard at all. The spices first tickled her taste buds, and when she bit into the mutton, the fresh and sweet flavor suddenly burst forth in her mouth. It was the taste of the grassland. The blue grassland that Amy had described to her just now, which was almost the same color as the sky, instantly appeared in her mind. Flocks of blue sheep strolled and grazed on the grassland. What a carefree and beautiful scene. The corners of Irina's mouth couldn't help but curl up. The spices gave the fresh and sweet mutton a rich layer of flavor, and also satisfied her greedy taste buds to the fullest extent. In addition to the cumin and chili powder, there was also a faint fragrance that lingered in the air, bringing with it the flavor of the grassland. If the beef was already amazing enough, then the mutton skewers should be on par with it. In fact, she felt that she might even like the mutton skewers a little more. Chapter 1698. Although the mutton kebab I ate on the grassland was delicious, I think I prefer the one boss roasted. Sure enough. Have I become a hardcore person? Mia licked her lips and said embarrassedly. In comparison, I think the way of eating on the grassland is more suitable for me. Elizabeth took a bite of the mutton and said with a smile. Her taste was probably the lightest among all of them. But Uncle Meg is so amazing. He learned it just by watching that grandpa roast it once, and he even created a new roasting method. Anna looked at Meg with some admiration and felt that she was stupid. She still hadn't learned how to roast beef kebabs. Anna is still young. When you grow up and can operate all kinds of kitchen utensils, you will learn quickly. Meg looked at Anna with a smile. She was a diligent little girl and learned quickly. It was because she was too young that she had to use a small stool to reach the roasting rack, not to mention how difficult it was for her to hold many bamboo skewers with her small hands. I have officially decided that from today onwards, I will give half of my love for beef kebabs to mutton kebabs, Barbara announced solemnly. Then, she took a bite of the mutton and chewed with a face full of indulgence. The feedback seems to be good. Mag looked at the ladies who were eating the mutton skewers happily, and also took a bite out of a mutton skewer. His control of the fire was much worse than Eddie's. After all, it was his first time roasting mutton. Based on his experience with beef kebabs, he was still lacking. The surface was too hard, and the moisture was too dry. However, this fresh and sweet mutton covered up the flaws in the technique. The cumin powder and chili powder were even better. It made the taste buds attracted by the spices and didn't care too much about the control of the fire. Sure enough, a handful of coarse salt is the most advanced method. Mag was deep in thought as he began to understand the advanced memorization skills hidden under Eddie's simple barbecue technique. He had already obtained the recipe for roast mutton kebabs. It seemed that he had to go to the test field for the god of cookery to hone his roasting skills tonight. However, as a lover of heavy tastes, to him, cumin powder and chili powder were like the soul. The original fresh and sweet taste could no longer satisfy his experienced tongue. He could only give this mutton skewer 4 points in his heart. It was still far from passing, and there was a huge gap between it and perfect. MIA, pour me a glass of beer. Meg put the kebabs on the grill and looked at MIA. How could one eat barbecue without beer? All right. MIA stood up and looked at everyone with a smile. What would you like to drink? I want a beer too, the kind with ice. Irina nodded slightly. I want beer, juice. Barbara met Mag's gaze, and obediently corrected the juice. She snorted, and indignantly said, I will be an adult in another half a month. Then you'll have to wait for half a month, Meg said calmly. Underage people were not allowed to drink. This was a red line set by Dian Dian. The smoke from the barbecue and the laughter of everyone made the restaurant feel particularly warm. Elizabeth took a sip of red wine and looked at everyone with smiles on their faces. The corners of her mouth also curled up slightly. It was really strange. She never thought that after her mother's death, there would be a place in this world where she could let down all her guard and sit with others and laugh with her heart open. She found her sister and also found a group of friends. To her, what was once a luxury was now the people who accompanied her. No one here cared about who was sitting on the ice crystal throne. It was not even as important as what they were going to eat tomorrow morning. After a few rounds of barbecue, the meat skewers prepared at the side were all in everyone's stomachs. There was also a large beer barrel at the side. Meg gave up on that half of the whole roasted lamb because it was not authentic enough. It was indeed not something that could be learned with just a few glances. Gina performed a mermaid dance for everyone. Compared to her sweet voice, her stiff dance moves were a little cute in her clumsiness. It made the atmosphere even more lively. As everyone sang and danced, they managed to unearth quite a few hidden skills, causing everyone to feel a little surprised. All right, today's barbecue is all finished. Meg put down the beer glass in his hand. He looked at everyone with a smile, and said, however, the highlight is yet to come. Today, I'll let everyone try the new product that will be officially launched tomorrow, mutton soup. New product? Everyone looked at Meg in surprise. They had heard that Meg was going to make mutton soup, but their attention was all on the mutton skewers. They did not pay attention to the soup at all. However, it seemed that the mutton soup was what Meg valued the most. MIA, come and help carry it. Meg turned and walked to the kitchen. Once he entered the kitchen, the rich aroma of the mutton wafted to his nose. Perhaps it was because he had just eaten all kinds of spicy barbecue, but the aroma that wafted to his face with steam made him feel even more awake and pleasant. It smells so good. Is this the aroma of the mutton soup? Mia followed him into the room, and her eyes immediately lit up as she looked at the large pot on the stove with elation in her eyes. Set up 13 soup bowls. I'll make the dipping sauce first, Meg said to MIA and took out a pile of small plates for himself. Of course, the mutton soup had to be accompanied by a dry dish. Dried chili, soybeans, peanuts, star anise, bay leaves, and other spices were stir-fried in the pot with salt. The salt was sifted, and then smashed with a kitchen knife. The slightly yellow cooked sesame seeds and a spoonful of salt were added. A perfect Sichuan-style dry dipping sauce was ready. At the side, MIA had already set up the soup bowls. Meg turned off the fire in the soup pot and opened the lid of the soup pot. Hot steam immediately rose up, turning the kitchen into a fairyland-like environment. A pot of mutton soup had to be simmered over a small fire for an entire night to be ready. Meg didn't have enough time, so he used the pressure cooker to steal some time. The milky white soup was overflowing with the aroma of the meat. Just by smelling it, one could feel the rich fresh aroma. There wasn't the slightest bit of fishy or rank odor. Looks like it's not bad. Meg revealed a smile at the corner of his mouth. He used the kitchen knife to cut the large pieces of cooked mutton into thin slices. He put them into the boiling pot at the side, and then poured them into the soup bowls. After adding the scalding snow-white mutton soup and sprinkling a handful of dark green coriander, a bowl of steaming hot and fragrant mutton soup was ready. The tender green coriander was dotted in the milky white soup, and the mutton took up half of the bowl. It looked and smelled good. Okay, let's bring it out. Meg took 2 trays with 8 bowls of mutton soup and brought them out of the kitchen. Mia served the rest. The people who were sitting and waiting were already a little anxious. When they saw Meg and Mia bring out the steaming mutton soup and put it in front of them, their eyes lit up. The milky white mutton soup looked very rich. The aroma of the meat and the coriander mixed together. Along with the hot steam, it made the people who had just eaten the barbecue and drank the wine salivate. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1699. A bowl of steaming hot mutton soup on a cold winter day was naturally the most wonderful thing. And for the people who had just eaten the savory and spicy barbecue and drank some cold beer, a bowl of fragrant mutton soup was also extremely tempting. "Father, are the seasonings in this small dish to be poured into the soup?" Amy asked as she pointed at the dry dish in front of her. "No, this is for dipping the mutton alone." Meg sat down, picked up a thin piece of mutton with his chopsticks, and dipped it in the dry dish. The mutton was immediately covered with sesame seeds, crushed peanuts, and chili powder. The originally ordinary-looking mutton was instantly infused with soul. Meg put the mutton into his mouth, and the fragrance of the dipping sauce was the first to erupt, teasing his taste buds. The crispness of the peanuts and soybeans, the spiciness of the dried chili, and the aroma of various spices filled his mouth before he could chew. The mutton was thin, soft, and not mushy. After chewing carefully, the fresh and sweet gravy overflowed, and the mutton collided with the dipping sauce. Like a comet hitting Earth, the originally sweet and fresh mutton was given a richer taste by the dipping sauce. Unlike the mellowness of the braised meat that was slowly soaked, this taste was more intense. The crispness of the crushed peanuts and the softness of the mutton didn't seem to match at first glance, but after entering his mouth, he realized what a match made in heaven. Even Meg, who had always been more particular about eating etiquette, couldn't help but let out a chewing sound. "This mutton is wonderful." Meg's eyebrows unconsciously raised. The mutton in the mutton soup really had to be paired with the dry dish. Of course, this dry dish was also indescribably wonderful. A mouthful of mutton went down his stomach, and the taste was slightly spicy. At this time, he scooped up a spoonful of milky white mutton soup and put it into his mouth, and his life seemed to have been sublimated. The mutton soup was made with mutton bones, and the bone marrow and collagen in the bones were all in the soup. The texture was warm, the taste was fresh and sweet, fragrant but not greasy, thick but not sticky. After circulating in the mouth, it immediately calmed the taste buds. After swallowing, he only felt a warmth rise from his stomach and then spread throughout his body. Comfortable, Meg's lips curled up into a smile. This mutton soup was worth all his hard work. "This soup is so delicious." Remi had already picked up the bowl and started drinking, making gulp, 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 gulp sounds. If you eat the mutton alone, it feels a little ordinary. But after dipping it in the dipping sauce, it's a completely different feeling. "It's so wonderful that I almost want to chew my own tongue." "How magical," Camilla said in surprise. "Yeah, this dipping sauce is delicious. Although it's a little spicy, it's so fragrant." Mia nodded in agreement. After finishing the barbecue, a bowl of mutton soup was served. The barbecue banquet was considered to be over. "Barbara, wait a minute. I have something to ask you." Irina stopped Barbara. Barbara looked at Irina in confusion, but she still stood there obediently. In the past, there had never been an idol in her world. But after meeting Irina, she had one. Those legendary stories made her deeply impressed, and she was willing to become a little fangirl. Irina brought Barbara to a corner and lowered her voice as she said, "I heard that you once repaired an ancient spell formation and then teleported yourself to this world." "Yes. That's right." Barbara nodded dejectedly. They could still be friends if she didn't mention that damned teleportation spell formation. If it wasn't for that lousy spell formation, she would still be the high and mighty princess of the Moon Nation. However, if it wasn't for that lousy spell formation, she wouldn't have been able to come to this world, eat so much delicious food, and make so many good friends. Compared to the Moon Nation, the Norland continent was really a huge continent. It was a pity that she didn't have time to travel further. Then, "Can you understand this spell formation?" A photo stone appeared in Irina's hand and played a corner of that ceiling spell formation. Barbara went forward to take a closer look. She nodded and said, "This spell formation looks very ancient, but it seems to be from the same era as the one I repaired previously. That's because there are many runes on it. That spell formation also has them, so I can understand some of them." "You can really understand it?" Irina looked at Barbara with surprise. The best spell formation masters in Chaos City had seen this photostone today, but Barbara was the first one to say that she could understand this spell formation. "Yes. I did a lot of research in order to repair that teleportation spell formation. There are many ancient books in the Moon Nation's palace, and some of them talk about ancient spell formations. However, this spell formation looks rather complicated, so I'm not sure if I can understand it completely." Barbara nodded. She was a little happy to be able to show off her ability in front of her idol. "All right. You don't have to go to work tomorrow. Follow me somewhere," Irina said to Barbara with satisfaction as she kept the photostone. "Huh?" Barbara was stunned. She subconsciously looked in Meg's direction. "But, it's all right. I have the final say," Irina said nonchalantly after seeing Barbara's worry. "All right." A smile appeared on Barbara's face immediately. "That's right. Irina is a super powerful 10th tier powerhouse and the Elven princess. If she wants to take me away, boss wouldn't dare to stop her. Go ahead. Angela can officially start work tomorrow. Shirley is also back. There's no problem." As expected, after Meg heard the news, he only looked at her with a deep gaze before nodding in agreement. "I didn't get fired, did I?" Barbara asked with a frown. Judging from Meg's words, she seemed to be a tool that could be replaced at any time. This made her, who had always seen herself as the pillar of the restaurant, feel a little threatened. "Of course not. You're a very important employee of the restaurant." Meg smiled. He didn't know where this girl's sense of danger came from. She was a very important tool, and one of her was worth 10 others. "That's good." A smile appeared on Barbara's lips again. As expected, the restaurant couldn't do without her. Everyone said their goodbyes and left. After playing for a day and eating so much delicious food, everyone was a little tired. Going back to wash up and sleep was naturally the most comfortable arrangement. Gina said goodnight to Meg and the rest, and went upstairs to rest. Meanwhile, Amy had already fallen asleep on the table with Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Little fellow." Meg smiled as he hugged Amy with one hand and picked up Ugly Duckling with the other. As he walked upstairs, he whispered, "How's the situation over there?" "No one can undo the ancient spell formation. There's no progress in the restoration work." Irina shook her head. "I didn't expect that in the end, I still have to rely on an employee of my restaurant to solve it." "Mammis is indeed a place with many hidden talents," Meg lamented. "Wonderful bookhouse." Chapter 1700. We had so much fun today. We ate so much good food, and even rode horses. It was so fun. Anna swung Shirley's hand with a smile on her little face. Yes, it was an interesting day. Shirley looked down at Anna with a smile on her face. "Big sister Shirley, you look so pretty when you smile," Anna said seriously as she looked at her smiling face. Ever since she came back, there was always a hint of sadness in her eyes. Even Anna had never seen her smile. Shirley was slightly taken aback. She suddenly realized that the negative energy that she had unknowingly given off after returning to Chaos City must have affected Anna. She looked at Anna, and apologetically said, "I'm sorry, Anna." Anna shook her head with a smile, and gently said, "It's all right. I just hope that big sister can smile more, just like just now." "Millimeter, I will." Shirley nodded with a smile. The haze that had accumulated in her heart during this period seemed to have been swept away by Anna's smile. Perhaps hatred could not be forgotten, but if it took over one's life, that would probably be the most unfortunate thing. "Whoa, look, big sister. I know how to turn over the evil dragon." The two giant dragons, one gold and one silver, were flying in the sky. Mia's happy laughter came from the front. "This is the most useless skill in a battle. Instead, it will expose your weakness to the opponent," Elizabeth commented coldly. "Oh." Mia immediately adjusted her flying posture, and followed beside Elizabeth. Then, she asked expectantly, "Then, when can I start learning combat skills? Just like how you can summon a hailstorm with a flap of your wings, can I do the same?" "No, you can't." Elizabeth shook her head. "What about the frost spell? That won't work either." "All right." Mia was instantly discouraged. She dejectedly said, "Seems like my talent is really bad. This is not a matter of talent." Elizabeth suddenly sped up, and then turned around to face Yarbemia. She looked into her eyes, and said, "You are Rankster's daughter. You have a pure bloodline and extraordinary talent. Then why can't I cultivate?" Mia was puzzled. "You inherited the bloodline of the Golden Giant Dragon. The cultivation method of the Frost Giant Dragon tribe is not suitable for you, so you can't cultivate the Frost technique. However, you can cultivate the Giant Strength technique of the Golden Giant Dragon tribe and become the king of the power to rule the sky." Elizabeth shook her head slightly and said, "So, if you want to become stronger, you have to accept the help of the Golden Dragon tribe." "But, am I not a Frost Dragon? Father is a Frost Dragon, and so are you." Yarbemia was a little conflicted. "Our grandmother was a Golden Dragon. Perhaps that's why you've inherited the Golden Dragon's bloodline, and it's the purest royal bloodline," Elizabeth said. "So, what the Golden Dragons said last time was true? If I want to learn powerful abilities, do I have to go to Golden Dragon Island?" Yarbemia frowned. She wanted to become stronger to protect her sister and everyone in the restaurant, but she couldn't bear to leave them. "That's not something I can decide." Elizabeth shook her head slightly. The relationship between the Frost Giant Dragon tribe and the Golden Giant Dragon tribe could not be said to be harmonious. A few hundred years ago, they even went to war because of their grandfather and grandmother. Rodu, Magus Tower. President, the preparations for the Magic Caster Conference are almost done. The invitations have also been sent out. This will be a more exciting and powerful Magic Caster Conference than the previous ones. Brent was looking at Richard with an excited expression. The Triennial Magic Caster Convention was the most important event for the Magus Tower, and the fact that the president had entrusted this task to him was a clear indication of the importance he held in the president's heart. As such, he naturally had to do his best. Richard looked up at Brent and asked, "Are you sure the Crassus will be there?" Although he hated that fellow very much, when he entered the palace today, His Majesty even asked him if Crassus would be there. Since he had already agreed, then he had to ensure that Crassus would appear at the Magic Caster Conference. "I'm sure he'll come. He's a very prideful old man. He registered his disciple, and she's not even a member of the juvenile division. Let's see how he's going to deal with this." Brent's smile was tinged with a hint of schadenfreude. "Isn't his disciple only 4 years old?" Richard said with a frown. He had seen that little fellow with his own eyes previously. Although he was much stronger than ordinary 4-year-old little fellows, if he were to participate in the official competition, he would only be tortured. Exactly. He's asking for it. This time, he will definitely ruin both his and Julian's reputation. Brent nodded with a smile. Interesting. Richard also smiled. Since there was no chance for him to defeat Crassus, it seemed to be a good thing if his disciple could defeat Crassus' disciple. Meg boiled a pot of mutton soup in a big pot before bathing. After it boiled, He stewed it over a small fire before going upstairs to bathe and sleep. This mutton soup had to be stewed for a night before it was just right. Moreover, if he only sold it in the morning, the fresh taste would not be as good in the afternoon. In order to appease the customers' stomachs, Meg decided to release the mutton soup tomorrow morning. After bathing, Meg lay on the bed and excitedly opened the mutton kebab experience bag in his mind. After the practice at night, Meg admitted that he was still one experience bag away from becoming an excellent mutton kebab chef. A huge amount of information flowed into his mind instantly. An excellent mutton kebab, from choosing the mutton, the bamboo skewers, how to cut the mutton, marinating it. There were many processes, and every step was not as simple as one would think. The simple and crude grilling method on the grassland was not suitable for every situation. After all, not everyone could experience the feeling of sitting under the blue sky and eating authentic grilled mutton skewers with the fragrance of the grass blowing in the wind. Mag kicked open the door to the test field for the god of cookery, and strode in without any hesitation. If I were to release 2 new dishes a day, they wouldn't have anything to say, right? Father, you have to believe me. There isn't a single chef in Chaos City who knows how to make mutton. We just have to open a mutton restaurant in the Aiden Square, and we'll definitely make a lot of money, a young orc with a big wark on his back said to the tall orc walking beside him. Chaos City is the place where all the races meet. There are many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It is not as simple as you think. The tall orc smiled and shook his head. He looked at the shops around the square. There weren't many restaurants that were open early in the morning. Along the way, he saw some shops that sold pancakes. Most of the restaurants also sold beef and pork. He didn't see any mutton restaurants. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1701. Leiden and more came from the Twilight Forest. Their tribe was a small one that herded sheep for a living, and was on the decline. There weren't many pastures in the forest, to begin with, and the various tribes were still fighting for territory. Some time ago, the last pastures of their tribe had been taken over. Leiden didn't want to be their shepherd, so he brought more to Chaos City. Chaos City was a good place. Leiden had long heard that there were opportunities everywhere. As long as one was willing to put in the effort, they would never starve to death. That was the truth. After coming here for half a month, the father and son relied on moving goods for others and sleeping on shared beds. Not only did they earn money for their meals, they even had 1,000 copper coins left. However, moving goods wasn't a long-term thing. There would come a day when Leiden couldn't move anymore. Moore hadn't gotten married yet, so he couldn't expect him to provide for him when he was old. Hence, the father and son didn't rush to the factory this morning. Instead, they came to Aiden Square, which was said to be the most prosperous place in Chaos City. They wanted to see if they could find any opportunities. Aiden Square was very big. There were all kinds of shops lined up along the crescent-shaped square. The restaurants were densely packed together. Tailors and cloth shops could be seen everywhere. From time to time, a drunkard would walk out of a red house with a red face. A languid woman in a gauze dress would close the door behind him with a look of disgust. This scenery stunned the father and son who hadn't had the chance to go out for a walk. Leiden, who had herded sheep his whole life, didn't have any other abilities apart from his strength. However, when he saw all the restaurants along the street, Moore came up with an idea: open a mutton restaurant. Leiden had been dealing with sheep his whole life. They didn't sell the sheep in the tribe. At most, they would exchange 1 or 2 for some salt with the merchants passing by, and the rest would be their own rations. He didn't have any other abilities, but he was good at roasting mutton. He could roast, stew, and make something new with simple cooking methods. He used to make many children in the tribe cry. However, he had never thought that he could earn money from roasting mutton. I didn't see any mutton restaurants along the way. Could it be that the people in Chaos City don't like mutton at all? Leiden said with a frown. How could that be? Mutton is so delicious. How could anyone not like it? Muir had a look of disbelief on his face. After giving it some thought, He said seriously, I feel that it must be because there aren't any mutton restaurants that can make good mutton. If they had eaten the mutton that you made, they'd definitely fall in love with mutton. Lei Den shook his head. He didn't lose his rationality because of Muir's words. Opening a restaurant required a large sum of money, and they didn't have the capital to do so now. Furthermore, even if he wanted to open a mutton restaurant, he had to at least know that there were people in Chaos City who really liked to eat mutton before he could know if he could do the business. Although he didn't have much experience, he wasn't stupid. He still had a sense of propriety. Unknowingly, the father and son had already walked to the other corner of the Aden Square. Muir suddenly pointed to the front, and said, Father, look. Why are there so many people queuing up in front? It's so early in the morning and it's so cold. Why are you queuing up? Are they waiting for work? Lei Den looked at the long line and was a little surprised. Come, let's go and take a look. There are so many people queuing up. The pay for this part-time job is probably not bad, Muir said with a smile as he walked forward briskly. That's true. Lei Den quickened his pace to catch up with Muir. He could slowly plan for the business, but he still had to work hard to save up enough capital first. However, when Lei Den and Muir got closer, they were a little dumbfounded. Those people queuing up were all dressed up nicely. They were even more presentable than those bosses that they had seen in the past few days. These people weren't just doing part-time jobs. Father, look. So this is a restaurant. Muir looked at Mamis in front of him with a surprised expression. This restaurant was really impressive. It had a whole crystal wall, and was even more luxurious than those restaurants that they had seen before. Yes, so it's a restaurant. Lei Den was also a little surprised. A restaurant that could make so many bosses queue up in the morning had to be very impressive. Even if they emptied their pockets, they probably wouldn't be able to afford a meal. He grabbed Muir's hand and got ready to bring him away. Mr. Mac is releasing mutton soup this morning, and mutton skewers this afternoon. 2 new items in one day. That's really not like Mr. Mac at all. Isn't that so? But the mutton smell is too strong. I can't eat it. Even the tripe tastes so good. What's mutton compared to it? Mr. Mac has godlike culinary skills. Now that you mention it, I'm a little interested in this mutton soup. The discussions of the customers made Lei Den and Muir stop in their tracks. The two of them exchanged glances, and then turned to look at the entrance of the restaurant at the same time. There was a small blackboard hanging at the entrance, with 2 lines of words written on it. Muir, who was slightly literate, read out, New item this morning, mutton soup. New item this afternoon, mutton skewers. It was a very simple line of words, but it made Lei Den and Muir's eyes light up at the same time. Muir looked at Lei Den excitedly, and said, Look, father. I told you that some people would like mutton. This restaurant is so popular with the big boss. He's also making mutton. Lei Den was also a little excited, but he quickly calmed down, and softly said, he's only just launched it. He can't be sure that everyone will like it. Then, let's queue up to try it, and see how the customers react. Won't we know then? Muir also lowered his voice, but his eyes were still glowing with excitement. But, Lei Den murmured as he glanced at the high-end restaurant. Such a restaurant wasn't something that the two of them could step into now. If the food is very expensive, we can just come out after taking a look. We won't sit down, and we won't dirty their chairs. Muir could tell that Lei Den was worried. I think the people in Chaos City are quite nice. All right. Then, let's queue up at the back too. Lei Den made up his mind, and brought Muir to the back of the line. The father and son had just arrived, and hadn't even found a place to stay. He felt a little embarrassed to go to someone else's restaurant to find out more information, but he had no choice. He only had this bit of ability, and he didn't have much money. If he didn't look carefully, he wouldn't dare to make a decision so easily. Welcome, Amy's. The restaurant's door opened slowly, and a young man in a white chef's suit walked out with a few beautiful ladies. He welcomed the customers into the restaurant with a smile. This is the restaurant's owner. He looks so young. Lei Den looked at that young man in shock. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1702. The customers greeted that young man familiarly. They should be the restaurant's regulars. Many of them even asked about the mutton soup and mutton skewers. That young man could also call out the customers' names or nicknames accurately. However, he remained mysterious about the new dishes. Lei Den was shocked by that young man's sophistication. He and Moore followed the line to the restaurant's entrance awkwardly. Welcome. Meg nodded at them with a warm smile. His gaze paused on the big pot that the young man was carrying. Nice to meet you. Lei Den quickly nodded with Moore. They lifted their feet and prepared to step into the restaurant. They rubbed the soles of their shoes against the door before going in. Mag's gaze lingered on the orc father and son for a while. He could tell from their tattered clothes that they weren't rich, and the big mark on the young man's back and the short knife on his waist meant that one of the father and son should know how to cook. The omniscient door told him that this father and son were just ordinary orcs. Perhaps they had just arrived at Chaos City, and did not know the price of mammoths, so they entered the restaurant by mistake. There were many customers like that every day. Most of them would find an excuse to leave after seeing the menu. Meg did not look down on them at all. There were more ordinary people in this world, after all. Spending 200 copper coins for a bowl of tofu pudding was a very painful thing for most people. Lei Den and Moore found a table near the entrance. It would be more convenient to leave the restaurant from here. They stood by the table, hesitating if they should sit down. Their clothes were not dirty. They had taken off their clothes when they were carrying the bags, and only put them back on after they were done. However, the tables and chairs were all as clean as mirrors. There was not even a speck of dust. If they sat down, they would definitely get a lot of dust on them, and the service staff would have to clean the place again. Please take a seat and look at the menu first. Someone will order for you later. Gina walked over to them, and placed the menu in front of them with a smile. It was Moore's first time seeing such a beautiful young lady who spoke so nicely. The young man's face flushed red instantly. He lowered his eyes, not daring to look at Gina. However, he pulled Leiden's sleeve and sat down. How can I do that? Lei Den sat uneasily. When he looked up, Gina had already walked toward the kitchen. Let's take a look at the menu first. Muir was also a little nervous and uneasy. However, since they had already sat down, they couldn't possibly leave immediately. They still wanted to see if these customers liked the mutton soup or not. All right. Lei Den nodded. Since he had already sat down, he would take a look at the menu first. The two of you, there are no more seats at the side. We brothers can share a table with you, right? A voice sounded in their ears. Lei Den looked up and saw a chubby, smiling face. The one who asked the question was a man dressed in a gorgeous long robe and wearing a big gemstone ring on his finger. Beside him was another man who was of a similar build and was also dressed in gorgeous robes. Lei Den could tell that the two of them were the boss. He quickly pulled Moore up and said nervously, "Boss, I'll let you guys sit here." Hey. When Lei Den and his son stood up, Harrison and Julian panicked a little. They quickly reached out to pull them back. Don't. If you guys don't want to share a table, we'll wait a little longer. If you let us go, Mr. Mac will think that we brothers are fighting for seats. It'll be very embarrassing. Harrison did not know whether to laugh or cry. This must be the first time the father and son came to Mammoth for a meal, so they did not understand the rules of sharing a table. Yeah. There aren't many seats at Mammoth, but there are quite a lot of customers. Therefore, the boss set a table sharing rule. As long as there are empty seats, we can sit down and share a table to eat. We're not fighting for seats. We just want to share a table, Jurguj explained with a smile. They did not want to be on Mr. Mac's blacklist for no reason because of a misunderstanding. After hearing their explanation, and seeing that the two bosses were even more nervous than him, Lei Den felt a little strange. He did not expect that there would be bosses who were willing to share a table with them. After thinking for a while, he sat back down with Moore uneasily. He carried his luggage to his feet, and nodded. You guys can sit. All right. Harrison and Jurguj smiled, and sat down on either side of him. Harrison sat down, and curiously asked Lei Den, judging from your accent, you don't sound like locals. Are you new to Chaos City? Millimeter. We just arrived. Lei Den nodded, feeling a little awkward. Then, you've come to the right place. Mamis is the best restaurant in Chaos City. You won't be able to get the delicacies here anywhere else, Harrison said with a chuckle. Yes. Lei Den nodded, and rubbed his hands together under the table. He did not know how to continue the conversation. Jurguj glanced at the father and son, and changed the topic. Mr. Mac stood us up for a day, and then came out with 2 new dishes. That's really amazing. We have to try this mutton soup in the morning. Let's see what Mr. Mac can do with this mutton soup. I've tried roast mutton before. There's a mutton restaurant in the west of the city that's not bad. However, I wonder if Mr. Mac can get rid of the rank odor in this mutton soup. Otherwise, it won't be very friendly, Harrison said with a smile. If he can't even do that, Mr. Mac wouldn't have come out with this mutton soup. Don't you have that much confidence? Jurguj said, not worried at all. Lei Den and his son pricked up their ears to eavesdrop on their conversation. They were even more curious about this boss Mag. What kind of culinary skills did he have to make this group of big bosses line up early in the morning despite the cold? Muir flipped open the menu and took a look at the prices on it. He couldn't help but gasp. Lei Den also glanced at it, and his eyes immediately widened. The whole page of zeros on the menu dazzled him. Even the cheapest tofu pudding cost 200 copper coins per bowl. Meanwhile, mutton soup cost 500 copper coins per bowl, and mutton skewers cost 100 copper coins per skewer, but they were not available in the morning. He did a quick calculation. The 1,000 copper coins in his pocket were not even enough for him and Moore to eat 2 bowls of Yangju fried rice. Moore looked up at Lei Den, and his throat moved subconsciously. He suddenly regretted bringing his father into this restaurant. This would put them in a difficult situation. What would you like to order? Yabemia asked with a smile as she came to their table. Lei Den stared at the menu in front of him, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He hesitated for a while, and said, We want a sweet tofu pudding. All right, a sweet tofu pudding. Please wait for a moment. Mia nodded with a smile, and turned to look at Harrison and Jurguj. Harrison glanced at Lei Den and his son, and said with a smile, We want 4 bowls of mutton soup, and I want a bowl of Yangju fried rice. I think this will go well together. Then I'll have a savory tofu pudding and youtiao, Jurguj said. All right, please wait for a moment. Mia nodded with a smile, and walked to the next table. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.